I was a scientist tracking 3I Atlas. What its alien signal told me about the creator. True story. Before you go any further, I need you to do something for me. Right now. Pause this. Take a screenshot. Save it to your phone, your computer, whatever. Email it to yourself if you have to. Because there's a very real possibility that by tomorrow morning, this won't exist anymore. I'm not being dramatic. I'm not trying to hook you with some cheap conspiracy theory rhetoric. I'm telling you that there are forces, and I'm choosing that word very carefully, that do not want you to hear what I'm about to tell you. 3 days ago, I tried posting this on Reddit. The post lasted 11 minutes before it vanished. Not deleted, not removed by moderators, just gone, like it never existed. My account was banned within the hour. 2 days ago, I tried a private Discord server with only 7 people I trusted. The entire server disappeared overnight. So yeah, save this. Because if I disappear, if this video gets scrubbed, at least someone somewhere will know that Dr. Marcus Webb tried to warn them. My name is Marcus Webb, and up until 4 months ago, I was an astrophysicist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. I have a PhD from MIT, 15 years of experience tracking near-Earth objects and interstellar visitors, and a reputation for being a level-headed, by-the-book scientist who didn't entertain wild theories or sensationalist garbage. I was the guy other scientists called boring, the skeptic, the one who'd shoot down your alien megastructure theory with actual math and data. I was also an atheist, proudly. The kind who'd debate religious colleagues over lunch about the statistical improbability of intelligent design. I'd argue that the universe was random, that consciousness was just electrical impulses, that when you died, you simply stopped existing. Past tense. Was an atheist. Because 4 months ago, everything I thought I knew about reality, about existence itself, was shattered into pieces so small you'd need an electron microscope to find them. Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. What I'm about to tell you isn't a religion. It's not faith. It's not something you believe in or choose to accept. It's data. Cold, hard, mathematical data that was transmitted across 3.7 light-years of empty space by something that wanted us to know the truth. And that truth, it's so much worse than the comforting lie of atheism, and infinitely more terrifying than any god humans ever invented. Because yes, there is a creator, something that made this universe, that designed the laws of physics, that set the cosmic clock ticking. But it's not watching over us with love. It's not testing our souls for some eternal reward. It's not even indifferent to our suffering. It's something so far beyond those concepts that trying to explain it using human language is like trying to describe color to someone who's never had eyes. I'm recording this in a motel room outside Barstow, California. I paid cash. No credit cards. No digital trail. My phone is in pieces at the bottom of a gas station trash can 40 miles behind me. I'm using a laptop I bought off Craigslist with money I withdrew in small amounts over 3 weeks. The webcam has tape over it. I'm not paranoid. Paranoia implies irrational fear. My fear is completely, utterly rational. Of the 12 scientists who worked on Project Lighthouse, that's the classified program I'm about to tell you about, 7 are dead. 3 have vanished without a trace. That leaves 2 of us. Me and Dr. Sarah Chen, who as of yesterday stopped answering her emergency protocol contact. So maybe it's just me now. Maybe I'm the last one stupid enough, or brave enough, or broken enough to try to get this information out before they finish cleaning up their mess. You're going to want to stop listening at some point. Your brain is going to reject what I'm telling you. That's normal. That's the safety mechanism every human has that prevents them from going insane when confronted with truths too big to process. Some of my colleagues called it cognitive dissonance. I call it mercy, because once you really, truly understand what I'm about to share, you can't unknow it. It's like being told you're living in a dream, and then someone shows you proof. The dream doesn't feel the same anymore. Reality takes on this thin, fragile quality, like wet paper that could tear at any moment. 3 of the scientists who worked with me on decoding the message killed themselves. Not because they were mentally ill, not because they had depression or psychotic breaks, but because once they understood what the message meant, continuing to exist felt unbearable. So here's your last warning, and I mean this with every fiber of my being. If you're the kind of person who needs to believe life has meaning, that your choices matter, that there's some grand purpose to human existence, stop now. Close this. Go watch cat videos or cooking tutorials or literally anything else. Because what I learned from the signal transmitted by 3i Atlas, an interstellar object that passed through our solar system in 2024, will burn away every comfortable lie you've ever told yourself about reality. It will make you question whether your thoughts are your own, whether your consciousness is even real, or just a subroutine in something so vast and incomprehensible that we're less than bacteria to it. Less than bacteria. At least bacteria serve a purpose in their ecosystem. Still here? All right, then you've made your choice. But I need to tell you one more thing before we begin, and this is the part that's going to sound completely insane until it happens to you. After I decoded the final section of the message, the part that explained what 3i Atlas really is, why it was sent here, and what's coming, I started seeing things. Symbols, patterns, not hallucinations. These weren't in my head. They were in the world around me, but somehow I'd never noticed them before. In the cracks in the sidewalk, in the way shadows fell across my desk at a specific time of day, in the random static on a dead TV channel, geometric shapes that repeated in ways that violated probability. And here's the thing that made me realize I wasn't going crazy. Other people who'd read the complete message saw them too. The exact same symbols, in different locations, at different times, like we'd been given new eyes or like a filter had been removed, and now we could see the underlying structure of something that had been there all along. Dr. Reeves saw them first. He was our lead crypto-linguist, guy who'd worked on decoding satellite communications for the NSA before joining NASA. Brilliant mind, stable guy, family man, coached his daughter's soccer team on weekends. 2 weeks after he finished translating Section 7 of the message, he stopped coming to work. Security found him in his apartment 3 days later. Official cause of death was cardiac arrest. But I saw the scene. I have a contact in local PD who owed me a favor and let me in before they cleaned it up. Reeves had covered every wall of his apartment with the symbols, drawn them in marker, scratched them into the paint with his fingernails, arranged furniture to form their shapes when viewed from above. And on his bathroom mirror, written in what the report said was his own blood, were 4 words in English. He is watching us. Not they. Not it. He. Capital letters. Like he'd met something, been seen by something, and needed to warn whoever found him. I thought he'd had a psychotic break, that the stress of the work, the implications of what we were discovering, had shattered his mind. I was wrong, because 3 weeks later, I started seeing the symbols too. And then I understood what Reeves had tried to tell us. The message from 3i Atlas wasn't just information, it was a key. And once you use that key to unlock a certain understanding about the nature of reality, something noticed. Something that had been watching this whole time, waiting to see which of us would be smart enough or foolish enough to read all the way to the end. I've been seeing the symbols for 73 days now. They're getting more frequent, more obvious. Yesterday I saw them in the reflection of my coffee, in the pattern of birds flying overhead, in the serial number of a dollar bill a cashier handed me. It's not random. It's not apophenia or pattern recognition gone haywire. It's a message within the message, and it means they know. They know I know, and they know I'm about to tell you. So, here it is, the real warning, the one that matters. If you continue listening, if you hear what the message said, there's a chance you'll start seeing them too. Not everyone does. Dr. Chen didn't, at least not that she told me. But roughly 40% of the people exposed to the complete translated message reported the same phenomenon. Same symbols, same progression, same growing certainty that something vast and incomprehensible had taken notice of them. Some people think being chosen, being noticed by a higher power, would be a blessing. They're wrong. It's the worst thing that can happen to you. Because once you're marked, once you're on their radar, you start to understand that you were never really in control of your life. That free will might be the cruelest joke ever played on conscious beings. And that understanding, that certainty, that you're just playing out a script written by something that exists outside time itself, makes every moment of existence feel like drowning in slow motion. So that's it. That's your final exit. After this, I'm telling you everything. The whole story. What 3i Atlas really is. What the message said. What the Creator actually is. And what it wants with us. And most importantly, why we're running out of time. Still here? Then God help you. Though as you're about to learn, that particular phrase doesn't mean what you think it does anymore. Let me take you back to October 2024. Back when my biggest problem was deciding whether to reheat leftover Chinese food or just eat it cold at 2 in the morning while reviewing data logs. Back when the universe still made sense, when physics was predictable, and when the most exciting thing that could happen in my field was discovering a new exoplanet or calculating the trajectory of some distant asteroid. I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Altadena, about 15 minutes from JPL. My ex-wife had gotten the house in the divorce 2 years earlier, along with the dog, most of the furniture, and apparently my ability to maintain normal human relationships. I was fine with it, honestly. The apartment was quiet. No one bothered me. I could work 16-hour days without anyone complaining that I cared more about space rocks than anniversary dinners, which, to be fair, was probably true. My job at JPL was exactly as boring as it sounds to most people, and exactly as fascinating as it was to me. I was part of the Near-Earth Object Observation Program, but my specialty was interstellar objects, things that originated outside our solar system and just happened to pass through. We'd only confirmed 2 before 2024, Oumuamua in 2017 and 2I Borisov in 2019. Oumuamua was the weird one, that cigar-shaped object that accelerated in ways comets shouldn't, leading to all sorts of speculation about alien spacecraft, which was nonsense, of course. Bad data and overexcited astrophysicists seeing patterns where there were none. I'd even published a paper debunking most of the alien probe theories, showing how outgassing from a comet could explain the acceleration. I was the voice of reason, the guy who brought everyone back down to Earth with actual math. Looking back, the irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. On October 12, 2024, at 3:47 a.m. Pacific Time, the Atlas Survey Telescope in Hawaii detected something new. ATLAS stands for Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, but despite the dramatic name, it mostly just catalogs space rocks that pose zero threat to Earth. The detection came through our automated system as a routine alert, a fast-moving object on a hyperbolic trajectory, meaning it wasn't bound by the sun's gravity. It was just passing through. The preliminary data suggested it was small, maybe 50 to 70 meters across, with a highly elliptical approach that brought it in from way above the plane of the solar system. We designated it 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object. I remember seeing the alert on my phone while I was brushing my teeth. I remember thinking, cool, another interstellar visitor, and then going back to bed because I had a meeting at 9 and needed at least 4 hours of sleep. The next morning, I grabbed coffee from the JPL cafeteria. Terrible coffee. The kind that tastes like it was brewed through a sock that had been used to filter motor oil, and headed to my office in Building 264. My colleague, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, was already at his desk, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and looking like he hadn't slept at all. Yuki was one of those guys who lived for this stuff, the kind of scientist who got genuinely excited about spectral analysis and orbital mechanics. "Marcus, you see the new I.O.?" he asked, using our shorthand for interstellar object. I nodded, sitting down at my workstation and pulling up the preliminary data. "Came in hot from galactic north, right?" Yuki grinned. 73 kilometers per second relative to the sun. Fast little bastard. But here's the interesting part. Look at the light curve. He pulled up a graph showing the object's brightness over time. It was irregular. Really irregular. Not the smooth, predictable fluctuation you'd expect from a tumbling comet or asteroid, but something chaotic, almost random. "Probably just an irregular shape," I said, zooming in on the data. "Maybe it's fragmented, multiple pieces loosely held together by gravity." Yuki shook his head. "That's what I thought too, but look at the periodicity, or rather, the lack of it. There's no rotational period we can lock onto. It's like the brightness changes are completely random, but..." He paused, pulling up another screen. "When I run a Fourier analysis on the fluctuations, I get these weird harmonics. Peaks at specific frequencies that shouldn't be there if it's just random tumbling." I leaned closer, studying the graph. He was right. There were patterns in the noise, regular spikes that appeared at mathematically significant intervals, but that didn't mean anything. Space is full of weird coincidences, pulsars that tick like cosmic clocks, crystals that form in perfect geometric patterns. The universe does math naturally. "It's probably just how the light's refracting through outgassing," I said. "Once we get better images, it'll make sense." Over the next 3 weeks, 3I Atlas became the most observed object in astronomy. Every major observatory wanted a piece of it. Hubble, Keck, the VLT in Chile, even some of the big radio telescopes like Arecibo before it collapsed. The object was small enough and far enough away that we couldn't make out surface details, just a fuzzy blob that changed brightness in ways that continued to defy easy explanation. But here's what we could measure: its composition. Spectroscopy showed it had water ice, carbon compounds, and silicates, basically what you'd expect from a comet. Its trajectory was definitely hyperbolic, meaning it had come from interstellar space and would leave our solar system forever. Its closest approach to the Sun would be on November 8th, bringing it inside Mars's orbit but nowhere near Earth. Everything about it screamed normal comet, except for those damn light fluctuations. And then, on October 31st, Halloween, because apparently the universe has a sick sense of humor, something changed. I was working late, as usual. The building was mostly empty except for security and a few other insomniacs like me who treated the office like a second home. I was analyzing the latest data from the Very Large Array in New Mexico, a collection of radio telescopes that we'd pointed at 3I Atlas, just to see if it was emitting anything interesting. Radio observations of comets aren't that unusual. You can detect things like hydroxyl radicals and other molecules in the coma, the cloud of gas and dust that surrounds the nucleus. But what came through that night wasn't hydroxyl radicals. It was a signal. A goddamn radio signal, clear as day, at 1420 megahertz. That's the hydrogen line, the most famous frequency in all of radio astronomy. It's the frequency that neutral hydrogen atoms naturally emit, and it's also the frequency that every SETI program monitors, because any intelligent civilization would know about it. It's the universal "hello, we're here" frequency. At first, I thought it was interference. Radio telescopes pick up all sorts of garbage: satellites, cell phone towers, some farmer's garage door opener. But the signal was coming from exactly where 3I Atlas was in the sky, and it was moving with the object as it traveled across the celestial sphere. That meant it was either coming from the comet itself, or something was playing an incredibly elaborate prank. I called Yuki, then I called Dr. Sarah Chen, our radio astronomy specialist. Then I called my supervisor, Dr. Richard Kowalski, who I woke up at midnight and who was extremely pissed until I told him what I was seeing. Within 40 minutes, I had 6 people crowded around my workstation, all of us staring at the same impossible data. The signal wasn't constant. It pulsed, on and off, in patterns that were definitely not random. Short pulses, long pulses, gaps of varying lengths. It looked like code, like someone was trying to communicate. "We need to call the director," Kowalski said, his voice tight. "This is..." Jesus Christ, Marcus, do you understand what this is? I did. We all did. But saying it out loud felt insane. This was exactly the kind of thing that destroyed careers. The kind of claim that made you a laughingstock if you were wrong. But we couldn't ignore it. We spent the rest of the night documenting everything, triple-checking our equipment, ruling out every possible source of interference we could think of. By 6 a.m., when the morning shift started arriving, we had confirmed it beyond any reasonable doubt. 3I Atlas, an interstellar object from outside our solar system, was broadcasting a radio signal, and that signal contained structured, non-random patterns. We had no idea what it meant, not yet, but every single person in that room knew with absolute certainty that this was the biggest discovery in human history. What none of us knew, what we couldn't have known, was that this wasn't a discovery at all. It was a warning, and by the time we figured out what the message actually said, it would be far, far too late to do anything about it. That morning, drinking my 6th cup of terrible JPL coffee and feeling like I was vibrating out of my own skin with excitement and terror, I made a joke to Sarah Chen. I said, "Well, I guess this means I have to rethink my atheism." She laughed. God, I can still hear that laugh. She disappeared 4 months later, never found the body, and I'm pretty sure my joke that morning was the worst case of tempting fate in the history of the human species. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on November 2nd, 3 days after we'd confirmed the signal. I was at home, trying and failing to sleep, staring at my ceiling and replaying the radio data in my mind, like some people replay arguments they wish they'd won. My phone rang, not my cell phone, but my landline, a number I'd kept from the divorce because changing it seemed like too much effort. Nobody called that number. Nobody except my ex-wife's lawyer that one time, and telemarketers I immediately hung up on. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up, maybe the same instinct that makes you turn around when you feel like you're being watched. "Dr. Webb?" The voice was male, professional, completely neutral in tone. "This is Commander James Richter with Air Force Space Command. I need you to confirm your identity before we continue this conversation." My brain stuttered. "Air Force? Yes. This is Marcus Webb. Can I ask what this is? Good. Dr. Webb, I'm going to need you to come to JPL immediately. A car is already on its way to your location. Should arrive in approximately 8 minutes. I sat up in bed, suddenly very awake. I'm sorry. What? It's almost midnight. What's this about? There was a pause, and I could hear other voices in the background. Muffled conversations I couldn't make out. Dr. Webb, 3 days ago, you and your team detected an anomalous signal from Interstellar Object 3I Atlas. That discovery has triggered certain protocols that are above your current clearance level. The car will be there in 7 minutes now. Please be ready. And Dr. Webb, don't bring your cell phone. Don't bring any electronic devices. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Not your colleagues, not your family, no one. This conversation is classified at the highest level. Do you understand? I didn't understand. Not even a little bit. But I said yes anyway. Because when the Air Force calls you at midnight and tells you a car is coming, you don't really have a choice. Good. The driver will verify your identity. You'll be taken to a secure location at JPL. Welcome to Project Lighthouse, Dr. Webb. The line went dead. I threw on jeans and a JPL hoodie, my hands shaking slightly. This was insane. This was how conspiracy theories started. Black cars, midnight meetings, classified protocols. This was Hollywood bullshit, not real life. Except, it was happening. I looked at my cell phone sitting on the nightstand, thinking about calling Yuki or Sarah Chen, but Richter's warning echoed in my head. Don't tell anyone. Classified at the highest level. I left the phone where it was. Exactly 7 minutes after the call ended, I saw headlights pull up outside my apartment. A black SUV with government plates. No markings, tinted windows. The kind of vehicle that screams federal agency without having to say it. A man in a dark suit got out, walked up to my door, and knocked twice. When I opened it, he held up a badge, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and said, "Dr. Marcus Webb." I nodded. "ID, please." I handed him my driver's license. He scanned it with some kind of device, waited for it to beep, then handed it back. "Come with me, sir." The drive to JPL took 12 minutes and felt like 12 hours. The driver didn't speak, didn't acknowledge my existence. I tried asking questions. What's this about? What's Project Lighthouse? Am I in some kind of trouble? But got nothing but silence in return. We didn't go to the main JPL entrance. Instead, we took a service road I'd never even noticed before, winding around the back of the facility to a nondescript building I'd always assumed was maintenance or storage. The SUV pulled into an underground garage, and only then did I realize this building had underground levels. In 15 years at JPL, I'd never known this place existed. The driver led me to an elevator that required both a keycard and a fingerprint scan. We descended. Not one floor, not two, but what the indicator showed as B5. 5 floors underground. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor that looked nothing like the rest of JPL. This was military. Gray walls, LED lighting, cameras in every corner, and that distinctive smell of recycled air from heavy-duty HVAC systems. We walked for what felt like 100 yards before stopping at a heavy door with a biometric scanner. The driver, or handler, or whatever he was, pressed his palm to it, and the door clicked open. Inside, Dr. Webb, it was a conference room. No windows, which made sense since we were 5 stories underground. A long table, 12 chairs, harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly unreal. And sitting at the far end of the table was a woman in an Air Force uniform with enough ribbons and stars to make it clear she was someone important, flanked by 2 men in suits who had intelligence agency written all over them. On the table in front of them were folders, laptops, and a projection screen on the far wall showing the JPL logo. "Dr. Webb, please sit," the woman said, gesturing to a chair. "I'm Colonel Sandra Martinez, Air Force Space Command. This is Dr. Lawrence Hartman from the National Security Agency, and Mr. Peter Voss from an agency whose name you don't have clearance to know." She said it matter-of-factly, like this was completely normal. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Did I have a choice?" I asked, sitting down. The chair was uncomfortable, probably deliberately so. Colonel Martinez smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Not really, no. But let me be clear. You're not in trouble, Dr. Webb. In fact, you're here because you're one of the best in your field. And your discovery 3 days ago has put you in a very unique position." She opened one of the folders in front of her. "Before we proceed, I need you to sign these documents. They're non-disclosure agreements, standard protocol for classified programs. You'll be read into a special access program with a classification level above top secret. Once you sign, you cannot discuss anything you learn in this room with anyone who isn't cleared for this program. That includes your colleagues at JPL, your family, your friends, anyone. Violation carries a minimum 25-year federal prison sentence, possibly more, depending on what you disclose. Do you understand? I stared at the documents she slid across the table. They were thick, dense with legal language. What if I don't want to sign? The two men in suits exchanged glances. Dr. Hartman from the NSA leaned forward slightly. Dr. Webb, you've already been exposed to classified information. The existence of this facility, the existence of Project Lighthouse, the fact that we're interested in 3I Atlas beyond standard astronomical observation. You're already in this. Signing just makes it official. It wasn't really a choice. It had never been a choice. I picked up the pen and signed my name 6 times across various documents, each signature feeling like I was selling a piece of my soul. When I finished, Colonel Martinez collected the papers and locked them in a briefcase. Welcome to Project Lighthouse, Dr. Webb. What I'm about to show you cannot leave this room. Everything from this point forward is classified under Special Access Program Lighthouse, established under National Security Presidential Directive 54. Even the existence of this program is classified. She nodded to one of the suits, who dimmed the lights and activated the projection screen. What appeared on the screen was a high-resolution image of 3I Atlas, but it was overlaid with data I'd never seen before. Radio spectrum analysis, signal strength over time, and at the bottom, a running transcript of decoded patterns, binary sequences, mathematical constants, geometric shapes encoded in the signal structure. Gentlemen, Martinez said, though she was looking directly at me, what I'm about to tell you is something only 47 people in the entire world know. 3I Atlas is not a comet. The room seemed to tilt. Dr. Hartman took over, his voice clinical and precise. The object designated 3I Atlas is an artificial construct. A probe, if you will, though that word doesn't adequately describe what it actually is. We've known about signals coming from interstellar space for longer than the public realizes. What makes 3I Atlas unique is that it's close enough for us to study in detail, and the signal it's broadcasting is stronger and more complex than anything we've encountered before. The radio transmission you detected 3 days ago? That's only one layer. It's also broadcasting in the microwave spectrum, in infrared, and in ways we don't fully understand yet. It's a multi-layered message, Dr. Webb, and we need help decoding it. I couldn't speak. My mouth had gone completely dry. Colonel Martinez continued. We've assembled a team of 12 specialists, cryptographers, linguists, mathematicians, astrophysicists. You'll be working in this facility under complete information security for the duration of the project. Your official JPL duties will be covered by a plausible excuse, family emergency, medical leave, whatever we decide. You'll have no contact with the outside world except through monitored channels. How long? I managed to ask. How long will this take? Mr. Voss, the spook whose agency had no name, spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, but carried weight. As long as it takes, Dr. Webb. Days, weeks, months. We don't know. What we do know is that 3I Atlas will reach its closest point to the sun in 6 days, and then it will begin its journey out of the solar system. We have a limited window to gather data and decode this message. After that, it's gone forever. He paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There's something else you should know. This isn't the first time we've intercepted signals from interstellar space, but it's the first time we've had a physical object broadcasting at close range, and based on the preliminary analysis, this message is different from the others. It's not a greeting. It's not an invitation to communicate. Based on the mathematical structures we've already identified, we believe it's a warning, or possibly a countdown. We won't know which until we decode it. A warning, or a countdown. Those words hung in the air like smoke. When do I start? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Colonel Martinez stood up. Right now, Dr. Webb. Your team is already assembled in the next room. You'll meet them in 5 minutes, after we finish your security briefing. Welcome to the most important scientific project in human history. Let's hope we can figure out what these things are trying to tell us before it's too late. The room they led me into was bigger than I expected, maybe 40 feet by 60, with workstations arranged in a semicircle facing a massive wall of displays. Each station had multiple monitors, high-end computers that probably cost more than my car, and enough cable management to make an IT professional weep with joy. But what struck me immediately wasn't the equipment, it was the people. 11 faces turned to look at me as I walked in, and I recognized exactly 3 of them from conferences and published papers. Dr. Sarah Chen was there, which shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow did. She gave me a small nod, her expression carefully neutral. There was Dr. James Reeves, the crypto-linguist I mentioned earlier, the one who ended up dead in his apartment. Back then he looked normal, healthy, excited even. He was talking animatedly with a younger woman I didn't recognize, and in the corner, hunched over a laptop, was Dr. David Klein, a mathematician from Princeton who'd won a Fields Medal for his work on prime number distributions. The rest were strangers, but they all had that same look, brilliant, exhausted, and slightly terrified. Colonel Martinez did quick introductions. Besides Sarah, Reeves, and Klein, there was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, yes, my colleague from JPL, which meant they'd grabbed him too, Dr. Rebecca Foster, a linguist from MIT who specialized in dead languages and pattern recognition, Dr. Ahmad Hassan, an AI specialist from Google DeepMind, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Owens, a signals intelligence analyst from the Navy, Dr. Marcus Sullivan, a physicist from Los Alamos who'd worked on classified projects I definitely didn't have clearance to know about, Dr. Jennifer Park, a neuroscientist from Stanford whose presence I didn't understand until much later, Dr. Thomas Wright, a theologian and philosopher from Yale, which seemed bizarre for a scientific project, and 2 more NSA cryptographers whose names I immediately forgot because they barely spoke the entire time I knew them. 12 of us total. 12 people who'd been selected because we represented the cutting edge of our respective fields. 12 people who had no idea we were about to collectively lose our minds. "All right," Colonel Martinez said once the awkward introductions were done. "You all have the same questions, so let me address them now. Yes, this is real. No, it's not a drill or a test. Yes, 3i Atlas is artificial. Yes, it's broadcasting a complex, multi-layered signal. No, we don't know who built it or sent it. Your job is to decode that signal and figure out what it's trying to tell us. You'll work in shifts to ensure round-the-clock coverage. You'll sleep in quarters on B4, eat in the cafeteria on B3, and you will not leave this facility until the project concludes, or you're dismissed. Your families have been notified that you're on urgent assignment. They don't know where or why. Questions?" Dr. Wright, the theologian, raised his hand tentatively. "Why is a theologian on a team of scientists and cryptographers?" Martinez actually smiled at that. "Because, Dr. Wright, if this message contains information about the origins of the universe or the nature of existence, we need someone who understands how humanity has grappled with those questions throughout history. You're not here to pray. You're here to provide context." Wright nodded slowly, looking like he wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult. The first week was chaos. Beautiful, exciting, terrifying chaos. We had raw data streaming in from every telescope and sensor array pointed at 3i Atlas, which by now was closing in on its perihelion, its closest approach to the sun. The object, I couldn't call it a comet anymore, not after learning the truth, was approximately 68 meters in length, irregularly shaped, with a surface that reflected light in ways that suggested metallic compounds mixed with ice and carbon. But the real data was in the signal. Dr. Hassan had set up machine learning algorithms to analyze the radio transmission, looking for patterns and structures. What we found in those first few days was mind-blowing. The signal operated on multiple frequencies simultaneously, each layer seemingly independent but occasionally synchronizing in ways that created harmonics. It was like listening to an orchestra where each instrument was playing a different song, but every so often they'd all hit the same note, and you'd realize it was actually one massive, incomprehensibly complex composition. Dr. Reeves was the first to make a breakthrough. On day 4, he came running into the main room at 3 in the morning. None of us were sleeping much, practically vibrating with excitement. "It's using prime numbers as a framework," he announced, pulling up a visualization on the main display. "Look, every major structural element in the signal corresponds to a prime number sequence. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. These aren't random fluctuations. They're deliberately encoded markers. It's establishing a mathematical baseline, proving its artificial intelligence by using concepts any sufficiently advanced civilization would recognize." We all crowded around his screen, watching as his analysis software highlighted the patterns. He was right. Once you knew what to look for, it was obvious. The signal was essentially saying, "Hey, we know math, you know math. Let's use that as our common language." It was exactly what SETI researchers had theorized for decades about how to communicate with alien intelligence. Use mathematics, the universal language. "So, we can decode it?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with barely contained excitement. "If it's based on mathematical structures, we should be able to translate it." Reeves nodded. "In theory, yes, but the complexity. This isn't just, 'Hello, we exist.' This is dense, really dense. Based on the data rate and the structural complexity, I estimate we're looking at the equivalent of maybe 1,000 pages of information, maybe more. 1,000 pages, transmitted by an object no bigger than a city bus, traveling through interstellar space for God knows how long, just to deliver a message to whoever happened to be listening when it passed through their solar system. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a bottle washed up on a beach. This was a deliberate message, encoded with enough redundancy and mathematical clarity to ensure it could be decoded by any civilization capable of detecting radio waves. Over the next 2 weeks, we made progress that would have been impossible without the team they'd assembled. Dr. Hassan's AI found deeper patterns, recursive structures that repeated at different scales, fractals, essentially, but made of information instead of geometry. Dr. Klein identified mathematical constants encoded in the signal: pi, the golden ratio, Euler's number, even the fine structure constant from quantum physics. Whatever sent this message, new physics, advanced physics. Dr. Foster and Dr. Reeves worked together on the linguistic aspects, trying to understand how the mathematical framework translated into actual meaning, into concepts and ideas rather than just numbers. I focused on the astronomical data, trying to understand the object itself. Where had it come from? How long had it been traveling? The trajectory analysis suggested it had originated from somewhere in the direction of the constellation Cygnus, roughly 3.7 light-years away. That meant it had been traveling for thousands of years, even at its current speed of 73 kilometers per second. Thousands of years, just drifting through the void, broadcasting its message on repeat, waiting for someone to hear it. The engineering required to build something that could survive interstellar space for that long, maintain enough power to broadcast continuously, and remain intact through temperature extremes and micrometeorite impacts. It was so far beyond our current technology that it made NASA's achievements look like a child's drawing compared to the Sistine Chapel. And here's what kept me up at night during those first weeks. If they could build this, what else could they build? If this was just a message probe, what did their actual spacecraft look like? Their weapons? Their civilization? By the end of the 3rd week, we'd decoded about 8% of the message. 8%. And what we'd found was confusing. The early sections seemed to be establishing context, describing the nature of spacetime using mathematical models that were more sophisticated than our best current physics. There were equations that looked like extensions of general relativity, but included additional terms we didn't recognize. Dr. Sullivan spent 48 hours straight trying to understand one particular equation, and finally concluded it might be describing extra dimensions beyond the standard 4 of spacetime. "It's like they're trying to teach us their physics before they tell us the actual message," he said, looking exhausted and exhilarated at the same time. "They're giving us the tools we need to understand what comes next." But there was something else we noticed, something that started as a joke, but became increasingly concerning. Dr. Park, the neuroscientist, mentioned that she'd been having unusual dreams since starting work on the project. "Really vivid," she said during one of our rare group meals in the cafeteria. "Mathematical patterns, geometric shapes I can't quite remember when I wake up." Anyone else? Everyone at the table went quiet. Because yes, we were all having them. Every single one of us. Dreams filled with symbols that felt meaningful but incomprehensible, like trying to remember a language you'd once known, but had forgotten. We rationalized it, of course. We were scientists. We were working 18-hour days, staring at complex patterns and mathematical structures. So naturally, our brains were processing that information during sleep. It was just our subconscious minds working on the problem. That's what we told ourselves. Dr. Wright, the theologian, had a different interpretation. In mystical traditions across cultures, symbols and geometric patterns have always been associated with divine communication, he said quietly. Mandalas, sacred geometry, the visions of prophets and saints. What if the message isn't just intellectual? What if there's a cognitive component, something that affects how we think, how we dream? We dismissed him. Politely, but we dismissed him. Because we were scientists. And that kind of thinking was too close to mysticism, to superstition, to the irrational fears of people who didn't understand how the universe actually worked. Looking back, I wish we'd listened to him. I really, really wish we'd listened. Because Dr. Wright was right. The message wasn't just information. It was something else. Something that got into your head and changed you from the inside out. And by the time we realized that, it was already far too late. 3 months into the project, we hit a wall. Not a metaphorical wall. An actual, concrete barrier in the decoding process where every method we tried just stopped working. We'd made it to about 15% of the message decoded, understanding the mathematical framework, the physics lessons, the basic structural elements. But then the signal changed, or rather, our understanding of it changed. The patterns we'd been following suddenly didn't lead anywhere. It was like reading a book where the language shifts halfway through from English to something that looks like English but isn't, where the letters are familiar but the words make no sense. Dr. Hassan had been running his machine learning algorithms non-stop, feeding them more and more data, refining the models, but they kept hitting the same dead end. "It's like there's a key we're missing," he said during one of our increasingly tense team meetings. "A cipher within the cipher. Everything we've decoded so far has been, I don't know how to put this. It's been the introduction, the preamble, but there's a door we can't open, and I don't know what we're missing." That's when Dr. Klein suggested something radical. "What if we need quantum computing?" he asked. "Real quantum computing, not the hybrid systems we've been using. I'm talking about a full quantum processor that can handle superposition states and entanglement at scale." The problem was, quantum computers like that barely existed. IBM had one. Google had one. The Chinese government claimed to have one, but nobody really believed their specs. And getting access to that kind of hardware for a classified project meant going through channels that could take months. But apparently, when you're working on the most important discovery in human history, channels move faster than you'd think. 4 days after Klein made his suggestion, a team of engineers showed up at our facility with equipment I'd only seen in theoretical papers. They spent 36 hours installing a quantum processing unit in an isolated room with temperature controls so precise they could maintain within 1,000th of a degree above absolute zero. The thing looked like something from a science fiction movie. A cylindrical chamber surrounded by cooling systems, magnetic shielding, and enough warning labels to make you think twice about standing too close. Dr. Hassan and his team spent another week programming it, translating our existing algorithms into quantum operations that could process information in ways classical computers simply couldn't. And then, on February 14th, Valentine's Day, which felt like the universe's idea of a sick joke, we fed the undecoded portions of the signal into the quantum processor and let it run. The results came back in 6 hours. 6 hours of processing that would have taken conventional computers decades. And what it found made everyone in the room go silent. The quantum computer hadn't just decoded the next section of the message, it had revealed that the entire signal was structured in quantum states. The message existed in superposition, multiple meanings layered on top of each other, collapsing into specific information only when observed in specific ways. It was like Schrödinger's cat, but instead of a cat being both alive and dead, the message contained multiple messages simultaneously, and which one you received depended on how you looked at it. "This is impossible," Dr. Sullivan whispered, staring at the output. "This level of information density, this kind of quantum encoding, we can't do this. We're decades away from being able to create something like this, maybe centuries. But someone had done it, and they'd sent it hurtling through space to find us." The quantum decoder had translated the next major section of the message, and what appeared on our screens was both more and less than we'd expected. Not sentences, not even really concepts in the way we understood them, but mathematical constructs that represented ideas, pure meaning stripped of language and filtered through the universal grammar of mathematics. Dr. Reeves was the one who figured out how to translate those mathematical constructs into words. He'd been working almost non-stop since the quantum breakthrough, barely sleeping, living on coffee and energy drinks that made his hands shake. But his mind was sharp, sharper than I'd ever seen it actually. Too sharp, if that makes sense. Like his brain was processing information faster than a human brain should be able to. "It's not a language," he explained, his words tumbling out rapidly. "It's pure semantic content encoded in mathematical relationships.
Imagine if you could take the concept of red and express it not with the word or even the wavelength of light, but as a complete mathematical description of how that color exists, what it means, how it relates to every other concept in the universe. That's what this is. It's not telling us things. It's showing us the mathematical structure of meaning itself. He'd been working with Dr.
Foster on creating a translation matrix, a way to convert these mathematical semantic structures into human language. It was imperfect, like translating poetry by running it through 3 different languages and hoping something of the original meaning survived, but it was the best we could do. And when they finally produced the first real translations, the first actual words extracted from the alien message, we gathered around the main display in silence. 3 words appeared on the screen, rendered in plain English by our translation software: observe, record, terminate. We stared at them for a long moment. Terminate, Sarah Chen said quietly. Terminate what? Dr. Reeves pulled up more of the translation. The quantum processor was still working, still decoding, and more words were appearing in real time, assembling themselves into something that resembled meaning. Observation, protocol, active, specimen development monitored, cycle approaching completion, reset sequence initiated, and then, the phrase that made my blood run cold, experiment concludes as designed. Experiment, Lieutenant Commander Owens said, her military composure cracking slightly. It's calling something an experiment. What experiment? Dr. Wright spoke up, his voice hoarse. Us. It's calling us an experiment. The room erupted into overlapping voices, everyone talking at once, but Reeves held up his hand for silence. There's more, a lot more. The quantum processor has decoded roughly 30% of the total message now, and it's accelerating. We should have a complete translation within 72 hours. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with dark circles, but they had an intensity that was almost frightening. But from what I've seen so far, Dr. Wright is right. The message is about us, about Earth, about everything that exists, and the word terminate appears 47 times in the sections we've decoded so far. Over the next 3 days, as the quantum computer chewed through the message and spit out translation after translation, the true nature of what we were reading became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't a greeting from an alien civilization. It wasn't an invitation to join some galactic community. It was a status report, a scientific log, the kind of documentation you'd keep when running a long-term experiment. Observations, measurements, milestones, and finally, the notation that the experiment was approaching its scheduled conclusion. The message described, in mathematical precision, the creation of what it called localized space-time construct 722-423, which we eventually realized meant our universe. It detailed the initial conditions, the physical constants that were set, the laws of physics that were established. It described the emergence of matter, the formation of galaxies, the evolution of stars and planets, and it described the development of what it called self-aware information processing systems, life, consciousness, us. All of it documented like we were bacteria in a petri dish, with the same clinical detachment a scientist would use to describe bacterial colony growth patterns. But here's what made it truly disturbing. The message included timestamps, not in years or days as we understand them, but in universal units based on fundamental physical processes, the decay rates of certain particles, the oscillations of cesium atoms, measurements that would be constant anywhere in the universe. Dr. Klein spent 18 hours straight converting those timestamps into our calendar system. When he finished, he called an emergency meeting at 4 a.m. We all stumbled into the conference room, exhausted and running on fumes, and he put up a single slide. It showed the message's timestamps converted to human years, the creation of our universe, 13.8 billion years ago, the formation of Earth, 4.5 billion years ago, the emergence of life, 3.8 billion years ago, the development of complex multicellular organisms, 600 million years ago, the evolution of humans, 300,000 years ago. Every single date matched our scientific understanding perfectly. Whoever sent this message didn't just know about our universe, they'd been watching it since the beginning, documenting it, recording every major milestone. And at the bottom of the slide, in red text, Dr. Klein had added one more timestamp that the message contained: experiment termination scheduled, and then the date. The date was less than 3 years away. Nobody spoke. What do you say when you're told the entire universe has an expiration date? When you learn that reality itself is an experiment, and the experiment is almost over? Dr. Park broke the silence, her voice shaking. This has to be wrong. We must be misinterpreting something. The universe can't just end. But Dr. Reeves was shaking his head slowly, and I realized he'd been staring at the display without blinking for at least 2 minutes. His eyes were fixed on the screen with an intensity that was deeply unsettling. It's not wrong, he said quietly. I've checked the mathematics 17 times. The translation is accurate. The universe isn't going to end, not in the way we think of ending. It's going to be reset, recycled, all the matter and energy compressed back down, the physical constants randomized, and then a new experiment begins. New physics, new forms of matter, maybe new types of consciousness. Everything we are, everything we've ever been, just archived and discarded. He finally blinked, and when he looked at us, there was something wrong with his eyes, something I can't quite describe. They looked too focused, too aware, like he was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. The message contains instructions for the reset sequence, mathematical protocols for collapsing space-time back to a quantum foam state. It's beautiful, actually. Elegant, like watching a complex equation solve itself. That was when I first realized something was wrong with Dr. Reeves. Not just tired wrong or stressed wrong, but fundamentally wrong. The way he talked about the end of reality with something approaching wonder, even admiration. The way he'd been staring at the translations for hours without moving, without eating, barely breathing. Sarah noticed it too. I saw her watching him with concern, saw her mouth. Is he okay? To me when Reeves wasn't looking. But we didn't say anything. Not then. We were all processing the impossible information we'd just received, trying to wrap our minds around the concept that everything, Earth, humanity, the stars, the galaxies, all of it, was scheduled for deletion, like files on a computer. What we didn't realize, what we couldn't have known yet, was that the message wasn't just information. It was active. It was doing something to anyone who read it, especially those who understood it most deeply. And Dr. Reeves, who'd been staring at the decoded sections longer than anyone, who'd been translating the mathematical structures into meaning, who'd been essentially thinking in the language of whoever created our reality, he was changing, being rewritten. And the worst part, he wasn't the only one. Over the next week, I would start to understand what he was seeing, start to notice the patterns myself, start to see the symbols that shouldn't exist, appearing in places they couldn't possibly be. And once you start seeing them, you can't stop. The message had marked us, and there was no going back. Dr. Reeves didn't show up for his shift on February 23rd. That might not sound significant. People get sick, have emergencies, oversleep. But in our facility, you didn't just not show up. We were 5 stories underground in a classified military installation. You couldn't leave without authorization. You couldn't even access the elevator without biometric clearance and an escort. If you were scheduled to work, you worked, unless you were physically incapable. And even then, there was medical staff on B4 who'd check you out and make the determination. So when Reeves's workstation sat empty at 0800 hours, alarm bells started ringing immediately. Lieutenant Commander Owens contacted security, who reported that Reeves had left the facility at 2:47 a.m., which was unusual but not unprecedented. We'd all been working insane hours, and sometimes you needed to go home, take a real shower, sleep in your own bed. Security had cleared him to leave. Nothing seemed wrong, but he was supposed to be back by 0700 and he hadn't returned. They'd tried calling his cell phone. No answer. His emergency contacts. Nothing. By 0900, Colonel Martinez made the call to send someone to his apartment. I wasn't supposed to go. I was supposed to stay in the facility and keep working, like nothing was wrong. But I had a bad feeling, the kind of instinctive dread that makes your stomach twist, and I convinced Owens to let me tag along with the security team. We need a familiar face, I argued. If something's wrong, if he's having some kind of breakdown, seeing someone he knows might help. She agreed reluctantly. So I rode in the back of a black SUV with 2 Air Force security personnel, neither of whom spoke to me during the 20-minute drive to Reeves's apartment in Pasadena. It was a nice place, 2nd floor of a modern complex, the kind of building where young professionals and small families lived. Normal, suburban, safe. The security team knocked. No answer. They knocked again, identified themselves. Still nothing. One of them produced a key, Apparently they had keys to all our residences, which should have bothered me more than it did, and opened the door. The smell hit us immediately. Not decomposition, not yet, but something chemical and wrong. Copper and salt, and something acidic that made my eyes water. The living room looked normal at first glance. Furniture in place, TV off, laptop closed on the coffee table. But then you notice the details. Papers scattered everywhere, covered in handwritten symbols. The same geometric patterns from the message, drawn over and over in increasingly frantic strokes. Empty coffee cups, at least a dozen, some with mold growing in the dregs. And the walls. Jesus Christ, the walls. Someone had covered them in symbols, not with pen or marker, but scratched into the paint with something sharp. Fingernails, I realized with horror. He'd scratched them with his fingernails, deep enough in places that the drywall underneath showed through. Hundreds of symbols, overlapping, creating dense patterns that hurt to look at. One of the security guys immediately radioed for backup and medical. The other drew his sidearm, which seemed absurd until I realized he thought there might be an intruder. "Dr. Reeves?" he called out, moving toward the bedroom. "Air Force Security. We're coming in. If you're here, make yourself known." No response. I followed them, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. We found him in the bedroom. He was on the floor beside the bed, lying on his back with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Dead. Obviously dead. His skin had that waxy quality corpses get, and there was rigor mortis in his jaw and fingers. But it was the room itself that made me take a step back, fighting the urge to run. Every surface was covered in symbols. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. He'd used markers, pens, what looked like his own blood in some places, creating a three-dimensional landscape of geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move when you weren't looking directly at them. The furniture had been pushed against the walls to create more floor space, and he'd arranged objects, books, clothes, electronics, in specific patterns that echoed the symbols. It was like stepping into a three-dimensional representation of the message, a physical manifestation of the mathematical structures we'd been decoding. And in the center of it all, written on the floor in what was definitely dried blood, were words in English. Experiment, habitat designation, 72423, subsection, Earth observation complete. One of the security guys started radiating for medical to bring a stretcher, but I was already backing out of the room. I'd seen enough dead bodies in my life. My father's open casket funeral, a car accident I'd witnessed in college. But this was different. This didn't feel like death. It felt like a message, like Reeves had been trying to tell us something before he died. The bathroom was worse. I don't know why I looked. Morbid curiosity, maybe. Or the same compulsion that makes you probe a sore tooth with your tongue even though you know it'll hurt. The security team was focused on the bedroom, calling it in, securing the scene, so I slipped into the small bathroom adjoining the bedroom and immediately wished I hadn't. The mirror above the sink had been used as a canvas. Written in what I desperately hoped was marker but strongly suspected was blood, in letters 6 inches tall and perfectly formed despite the obvious frenzy behind them, were 4 words. He is watching us. Not they, not it. He, singular, personal. And underneath, smaller, almost like a footnote, Reeves had written mathematical equations. I recognized them immediately. They were from section 7 of the message, the part that described the observation protocols, the methods by which the creator monitored its experiment. But Reeves had extended them, added additional terms, solved for variables we hadn't even identified yet. And at the bottom, circled 3 times, was a date, today's date, the day we found him, like he'd known exactly when he would die. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find one of the security guys staring at the mirror, his face pale. "Sir, you need to step away from the scene," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking at the equations, at the words, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He didn't understand what he was looking at, but he understood it was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. We were escorted out of the apartment as more personnel arrived, local police, military investigators, someone from the coroner's office. I caught fragments of conversation as they examined the scene. No signs of forced entry, possible psychotic break. Self-inflicted wounds on the fingers consistent with scratching walls. And then, quieter, from the coroner. Preliminary assessment is cardiac arrest, but we'll need an autopsy to be certain. Cardiac arrest. That would be the official story. A 43-year-old man in good health just happened to have a massive heart attack while having a psychotic episode and covering his apartment in alien symbols. Nothing suspicious there. Nothing that might suggest that what we were decoding was dangerous. Not just intellectually, but physically. Literally capable of killing you. They drove me back to the facility in silence. I sat in the back of the SUV, staring at my hands, and realized they were shaking. I couldn't stop thinking about Reeves's eyes, how they'd been open, staring at the ceiling. Had he seen something there? In those last moments, when his heart gave out and his brain started dying, had the message shown him something? Had he, whoever or whatever that was, been watching as Reeves scratched his final warnings into the walls? I thought about the equations he'd written, the extensions to the observation protocols. Reeves had been our best cryptolinguist, the one who understood the mathematical language of the message better than anyone. If the message was doing something to us, changing us somehow, he would have been affected first and worst. He'd been staring at the decoded sections longer than anyone else, thinking in those patterns, dreaming in that alien mathematics. What if it wasn't just a message? What if it was also a carrier signal? Something that infected your thoughts, rewrote your neural pathways, made you see things that shouldn't exist. What if understanding it was itself dangerous? When we got back to the facility, Colonel Martinez called an emergency meeting. Everyone was there. What was left of the team, anyway? 10 of us now, down from 12. We sat around the conference table in silence until Martinez walked in with 3 other officers I didn't recognize. Her face was grim. "You all know by now that Dr. Reeves is dead," she said without preamble. "The official cause of death will be listed as cardiac arrest brought on by extreme stress and sleep deprivation. What you saw in his apartment is classified at the highest level. You do not discuss it with anyone, including each other, outside of official project briefings. Am I clear?" We nodded mutely. Dr. Foster raised a trembling hand. Can we request to be removed from the project? I think some of us aren't equipped to handle this. The psychological toll." "Request denied," Martinez cut her off. "You're all in this until completion. You signed contracts, you have clearances, you know things that make you a national security asset and a potential liability. No one leaves until we understand what we're dealing with." The room erupted. Wright stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "You can't keep us here against our will. This isn't legal." "Dr. Wright, sit down," one of the other officers said coldly. "This project operates under executive authority and the National Security Act. Your rights are whatever we say they are." Dr. Hassan spoke up, his voice tight. "So we're prisoners. That's what you're telling us. We're prisoners until this message drives us as crazy as it drove Reeves." Martinez's expression didn't change. "You're essential personnel in a classified program of existential importance. Dr. Reeves's death was a tragedy, but we can't stop now. We're at 37% of the message decoded. If what we've learned is true, if reality itself is scheduled for termination, then we need to understand the complete message. Maybe there's something in the remaining sections, instructions, a way to prevent it, or at least understand it." She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. "I know you're scared. I know what you saw in Reeves's apartment was disturbing, but walking away doesn't make you safe. Whatever affected Dr. Reeves, you've all been exposed to it. The only way forward is through. We decode the rest of the message. We understand what we're dealing with, and then we figure out what to do about it. That's the mission. That's what we're going to do." No one argued. What could we say? She was right. We were already infected, if that's what you wanted to call it. Already marked by what we'd learned. The symbols that Reeves had scratched into his walls. I was seeing them in my peripheral vision now, in the patterns of shadows on the wall, in the way light reflected off my coffee cup. And when I closed my eyes, I saw them even clearer. Mathematical structures rotating in impossible dimensions. We were all seeing them. We just weren't talking about it. Because talking about it would mean admitting that what happened to Reeves could happen to any of us. That understanding the message came with a price, and we were all going to pay it, whether we wanted to or not. The work continued, but everything felt different after Reeves. We moved through the facility like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when necessary. The quantum computer kept churning through the message, spitting out translations that appeared on our screens in real time, and we documented everything with mechanical precision. But there was a tension in the air, thick and suffocating, like waiting for a bomb to go off. We all knew someone else was going to break. The only question was who and when. Dr. Park spent most of her time in her quarters, coming out only for mandatory meetings. Dr. Foster developed a twitch in her left eye that got worse every day. Dr. Hassan stopped eating, living entirely on coffee and energy drinks until his hands shook so badly he could barely type. And me? I started seeing the symbols everywhere, not just in shadows and reflections anymore, but in everything. In the arrangement of furniture, in the pattern of tiles on the floor, in the way people stood in relation to each other. The world had become a three-dimensional message written in a language I was only beginning to understand, and I couldn't make it stop. 3 weeks after Reeves died, we hit 58% decoding completion. The quantum processor had unlocked Section 12, and what we found there made everything we'd learned before seem trivial. Dr. Klein called everyone to the main display room at 2 a.m. We'd all stopped sleeping normal hours anyway, and what he showed us broke something fundamental in how I understood reality. The message contains a detailed description of what it calls the architect, he said, his voice flat, emotionless, like he'd exhausted his capacity for feeling. That's the closest translation we have for the mathematical construct it describes. Not God, not in any sense that human religion has ever conceived. Something else entirely. He pulled up the translation on the main screen, and we read in silence. The architect exists outside causality, prime consciousness, not bound by temporal flow. Creates substrate realities as experimentation protocol, observation without participation, measurement without interference until conclusion, parameters met. The words hung there, clinical and cold, describing something that shouldn't be possible. It's talking about consciousness, Dr. Park said quietly, speaking for the first time in days. Prime consciousness, a form of awareness that exists independent of physical reality. That's not scientifically possible. But Dr. Wright was shaking his head, and for the first time since we'd started this project, he looked vindicated rather than marginalized. Every mystical tradition has touched on this, he said. The concept of a consciousness that exists beyond the physical, beyond time. Brahman in Hindu philosophy, the absolute in various Western traditions, the ground of being. But they all got it wrong in one crucial way. They assumed it was benevolent, that it cared about us. He gestured at the screen. This is describing something that creates universes the way we create bacterial cultures, with scientific interest, but no emotional investment. Dr. Klein pulled up more of the translation, and what appeared made my stomach drop. The message described the process of universe creation in mathematical detail, not the Big Bang as we understood it, but something more deliberate, more engineered. The architect, and I hated using that term, hated giving it a name that made it seem comprehensible, had created what the message called a localized space-time manifold, our universe, but not through some divine act of will. Through a process the message described as substrate cultivation. The translation was technical, dense with mathematical equations that described the physics of reality creation, but the core concept was almost insultingly simple. The architect had created a framework, a set of initial conditions and physical laws, and then let it evolve on its own, observing the results, like planting seeds in soil and watching what grows. Cultivation, not simulation, not in the way we think of computer simulations. Those are just information, ones and zeros, mathematical abstractions. This was real. Matter, energy, space-time itself, all of it actually existed, was actually physical, actually real. But it existed inside something larger, something that contained our universe the way a petri dish contains bacteria. We weren't living in a simulation, we were living in an experiment. A controlled environment created to observe how complexity emerges from simple rules, how consciousness develops, how civilizations rise and fall. And we weren't even the first. The message referenced other substrate realities, other universes created with different physical constants, different laws of physics. Some had produced no life at all. Some had produced life, but no consciousness. Some had produced consciousness, but it had destroyed itself before reaching technological sophistication. We were experiment number 72423, 7 being some kind of category designation we hadn't fully understood, 242 being the sequential number in that category, and 3 being, we weren't sure, a subsection, a revision, a third attempt at this particular set of parameters. This is insane, Dr. Sullivan said. But there was no conviction in his voice. We're talking about something that exists outside of reality, outside of physics as we understand it, that creates entire universes as a scientific experiment. That can't be. But the mathematics didn't lie. The message contained proofs, demonstrations, equations that extended far beyond our current understanding of physics, but were internally consistent and elegant. It described higher dimensional spaces where our universe was just one of many, pocket realities embedded in a substrate we couldn't perceive, each one governed by different rules, each one an experiment testing different variables. And it described the architect's observation protocols, how it monitored these experiments, collected data, measured outcomes, not through physical instruments, through something the message called consciousness resonance, a method of observing that we couldn't fully translate, but seemed to involve direct awareness of conscious thought within the experimental substrate. It wasn't watching us with cameras or sensors. It was aware of every conscious thought that occurred in this universe, the way you're aware of your own thoughts. We were patterns of information processing occurring inside an experiment it had created, and it perceived those patterns directly. That's when I understood what Reeves had meant. He is watching us, not metaphorically, not in some abstract theological sense. Literally, every thought we had, every decision we made, every moment of awareness, it was all data being collected and analyzed by something so far beyond human comprehension that calling it God was like calling the ocean a puddle. And the worst part? The message made it clear that this observation was automated. The architect wasn't actively paying attention to us the way a scientist watches a particular bacterium under a microscope. It had set up observation protocols that ran automatically, collecting data continuously, flagging significant developments for later analysis. We were being watched, documented, measured, but not because we were important, because everything in the experiment was being documented. We weren't special. We were just data points in a data set so vast it probably contained trillions of conscious entities across thousands of substrate realities. And our data set was reaching its scheduled conclusion. The experiment had run for 13.8 billion years. That wasn't an accident. That was the programmed duration. Time to collect the results, archive the data, and start fresh with a new set of parameters. Dr. Hassan pulled up another section of the translation, and his voice was shaking. There's more. It describes the reset process in detail. It's not destruction in the way we think of it. The matter and energy don't disappear. They're compressed back down to a quantum state, and the physical constants are randomized for the next iteration. Everything that exists, every atom, every photon, every thought and memory and experience gets broken down to pure quantum information and recycled into the next experiment. He looked at us, and I saw tears running down his face. We don't die. We get erased, unmade. Every person who's ever lived, every civilization that ever existed, every beautiful and terrible thing that's ever happened, it all gets compressed back to nothing and used as raw material for the next universe. And there's no record, no memory, no acknowledgement that we ever existed. We're just failed experiment 7-2423, destined to be disassembled and recycled. The room was silent except for the hum of computers and the ventilation system. Someone was crying. I think it was Dr. Foster, but I couldn't be sure because I was staring at the symbols I could see forming in the space between air molecules, mathematical structures that described the architecture of reality itself. I stood up, suddenly needing to move, to do anything other than sit and absorb this information. "This is wrong," I said, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. The mathematics was perfect. The translations were consistent across multiple sections. The quantum computer had verified everything dozens of different ways. This was real. This was true. We lived in a universe that was created as an experiment, observed by an entity that existed outside that universe, and scheduled for termination so the experiment could be concluded and the resources recycled. Everything I'd believed about reality, about existence, about the meaning of life, it was all wrong. There was no cosmic purpose, no divine plan, no reason for suffering or reward for virtue. We were bacteria in a petri dish, and the scientist was about to wash out the dish and start a new culture. "I need to get out of here," I heard myself say. "I need to leave. I need to," but there was nowhere to go, no escaping this knowledge. Even if I left the facility, even if I never looked at the message again, I knew. The information was in my head, rewriting my understanding of reality, and I couldn't unknow it. None of us could. Dr. Wright spoke up, his voice surprisingly steady. "There's a reason every major religion has concepts of faith that transcend understanding. A reason why mystical traditions talk about truths too terrible to face directly. Because some knowledge breaks the human mind. We weren't meant to know this. We weren't meant to understand the nature of our own existence with this level of clarity. The message is truthful, but truth without context, without meaning, without hope, that's not enlightenment. That's annihilation of the self. He looked around at all of us. Reeves saw this. He understood it completely, and it killed him. Not physically, not directly, but his mind couldn't reconcile what he knew with the need to continue existing. And I think we're all heading toward the same conclusion he reached. He was right. I could feel it happening in my own mind. The slow erosion of the foundations that made existence bearable. If nothing mattered, if we were just temporary patterns of information in an experiment scheduled for deletion, why continue? Why eat, sleep, work, love, create, struggle? What was the point of any human endeavor if it was all going to be erased without trace or meaning? I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of it all. 15 years of education, a PhD from MIT, a career studying the cosmos, and for what? To discover that the cosmos was just somebody's science project. That consciousness, that beautiful, terrible gift of awareness that made me human, was just an emergent property that the experimenters found mildly interesting. That everything I'd ever done, every choice I'd ever made, every person I'd ever loved, was just data being collected for analysis by something that viewed me the way I viewed the bacteria that grew on the petri dishes in my high school biology class. The laughter turned into something else, something that hurt my throat, and I realized I was crying and laughing at the same time, my mind breaking under the weight of truth too heavy for human consciousness to bear. Sarah Chen grabbed my shoulders, forced me to look at her. Marcus, stay with me. We can't fall apart. Not yet. We need to finish decoding the message. There might be something else, something we're missing. But even as she said it, I could see the symbols reflected in her eyes, the geometric patterns that described the fundamental architecture of reality. And I knew she was seeing them too. We were all seeing them now. The message had infected us, changed us, made us aware of structures that existed beyond normal human perception. And once you saw them, you couldn't stop seeing them. The world became transparent, and beneath it, you could see the scaffolding, the experimental apparatus, the cage we'd been living in our entire lives without knowing it. I was going insane. Or maybe I was becoming sane for the first time, seeing reality as it actually was rather than the comfortable illusion human consciousness usually created. I honestly couldn't tell the difference anymore, and that terrified me more than anything else in this entire nightmare. Dr. Rebecca Foster was the second to go. It happened on March 9th, 3 weeks after we'd decoded Section 12 and learned the truth about the architect. She'd been getting quieter, more withdrawn, spending most of her time staring at the translations, with that same unfocused intensity Reeves had developed. The eye twitch had gotten worse, almost constant now, and she'd stopped participating in team discussions entirely. She'd just sit at her workstation, reading the decoded sections over and over, her lips moving silently like she was memorizing scripture. On March 8th, she requested permission to go home for the night. Colonel Martinez approved it. We all needed breaks, needed to pretend we still had normal lives outside the facility. Foster never made it home, or rather, she made it to the train station. Security footage showed her standing on the platform at the Gold Line station in Pasadena at 11:47 p.m. The platform was nearly empty, just her and 2 other passengers waiting for the last train of the night. And then, when the train's headlights appeared in the tunnel, she stepped forward, deliberately. No hesitation, no stumbling. She just walked off the platform directly into the path of the oncoming train. The driver said she was looking up when she did it, not at the train, but up, at the sky, like she was seeing something above her. Her eyes were wide open, and she was smiling. The 2 other passengers on the platform said the same thing. She'd been standing normally one moment, then turned her face toward the sky, smiled, and stepped forward. One of them said she'd been whispering something just before but couldn't make out the words. The conductor tried to brake, but at that speed, that distance, there was nothing he could do. The impact killed her instantly. The official report said suicide brought on by work-related stress and possible mental health crisis. They found her apartment afterward, and it looked like a smaller version of what Reeves had done. Symbols on the walls, though not as extensive. Papers covered in mathematical equations and geometric patterns. And on her bathroom mirror, written in lipstick, "The observation is complete. It is beautiful. I didn't go to see the scene this time. I didn't need to. I knew what it would look like. I was starting to see the same symbols she'd been drawing, appearing in my own vision like floaters that wouldn't go away no matter how much I blinked. Dr. Thomas Wright disappeared 6 days later. No body, no suicide note, no security footage showing what happened. He simply didn't show up for his shift on March 15th, and when security checked his apartment, he was gone. Not packed and left gone, but vanished. His car was in the parking lot. His phone was on the kitchen counter. His wallet and ID were on the nightstand. But Wright himself had simply ceased to exist in any traceable way. The apartment showed signs of his final hours. A half-eaten meal on the table, his laptop open to a document covered in notes about consciousness and the nature of observation. And on every wall, covering every available surface in neat, careful handwriting, were excerpts from religious texts mixed with equations from the Message, passages from the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, Buddhist sutras, all interwoven with mathematical descriptions of reality architecture. It was like he'd been trying to reconcile his faith with what we'd learned, to find some bridge between human spiritual understanding and the cold mathematics of the architect. The last entry in his laptop document was time-stamped at 3:33 a.m. on March 15th. It read, "I understand now. The mystics were right. We are being dreamed by something vast, and now the dreamer is waking. To be observed is to exist. To be unobserved is to return to void. I can feel the attention withdrawing. God is not dead. God is simply looking away, and then nothing. He was never found." Lieutenant Commander Patricia Owens lasted another week. She'd been holding together better than most of us, maintained her military discipline, kept working methodically, even as the rest of us started to fray at the edges. But on March 22nd, she didn't show up for the morning briefing. Security found her in her quarters on B4, unconscious but alive, with a bottle of prescription sleeping pills on the nightstand. Empty. She'd taken all of them, 60 pills at once, enough to stop her heart 3 times over. They rushed her to the medical bay, pumped her stomach, hit her with naloxone and every cardiac stimulant they had. They managed to save her life, technically, but she never woke up. She's in a coma now, in a military hospital somewhere I don't have clearance to know about. Her brain activity is normal, they said. She's not brain dead, not in a vegetative state. She's just not there. Like her consciousness decided to vacate, leaving the body running on autopilot. I heard from one of the medical staff who'd been there when they found her that she'd covered her quarters in symbols too, carved them into the walls with what looked like a fork from the cafeteria, and tattooed on her left forearm, done with crude prison-style equipment she'd apparently made from a pen and a lighter, were coordinates. Not spatial coordinates, temporal ones. A date. The same date that kept appearing in the message. The termination date. That left 7 of us. 7 out of the original 12. Dr. Sarah Chen, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, Dr. David Klein, Dr. Ahmad Hassan, Dr. Marcus Sullivan, Dr. Jennifer Park, and me. We didn't talk about the others much. Couldn't, really. What was there to say? That they'd been weak? That they hadn't been able to handle the truth? We were all breaking in the same way, just at different speeds. I could see it in how we moved, how we talked, how we interacted with the world. We were becoming translucent, like we were slowly fading out of reality. Our connection to normal human existence wearing thin. And the worst part? We couldn't stop. We should have. After Foster, after Wright, after Owens, we should have told Colonel Martinez that we were done, that continuing was suicide, that the message was poison to human consciousness. But we didn't, because by then, we were addicted. That's the only word that fits. The message was like a drug, and we were junkies, and no amount of death or madness could make us stop chasing the next hit of forbidden knowledge. I'm not being metaphorical. The compulsion to keep reading, keep decoding, keep understanding was physical. When I tried to stay away from the translations, tried to focus on anything else, I'd get actual withdrawal symptoms, shaking hands, cold sweats, a crawling sensation under my skin like insects burrowing through my flesh, and the symbols would get worse, pressing in from all sides until I couldn't see anything else. The only relief was to go back to the message, to read more, to let the mathematical structures flow through my consciousness and rearrange my understanding of reality. Then the withdrawal symptoms would fade, the symbols would recede to a manageable level, and I'd feel, if not good, then at least functional, for a while, until I needed more. We were all experiencing it. Sarah admitted it one night when we were both in the facility kitchen at 3 a.m., neither of us able to sleep. "It's rewriting us," she said quietly, staring at her coffee like it might contain answers. "The message. It's not just information, it's active. It's changing our neural pathways, making us more capable of understanding it, but in the process, making us less human, less capable of existing in normal reality." She looked at me with hollow eyes. "I tried not to read any more yesterday, made it 6 hours. Then I started seeing the symbols everywhere, and they were screaming, Marcus. Not making sound, but screaming meaning directly into my brain. I had to go back, had to read more, and the moment I did, they stopped. The symbols. Jesus Christ, the symbols. That's when I knew I was losing my grip on sanity. When I started seeing them not just in patterns and shadows, but in everything. I'd look at clouds and see geometric structures that described quantum field fluctuations. I'd stare at cracks in the concrete floor and see mathematical proofs about the nature of space-time embedded in their patterns. I'd watch people move and see their trajectories as equations, their choices as probability wave functions collapsing into specific outcomes. The world had become a text written in the language of the architect, and I could read it now, whether I wanted to or not. I know how this sounds. I know you're thinking I'd gone insane, that the stress and sleep deprivation and trauma had broken my mind, that I was experiencing pareidolia on steroids, seeing patterns that didn't exist because my brain was desperately trying to make sense of chaos. I thought the same thing, for a while. I'd catch myself staring at the grain in a piece of wood, convinced I was seeing complex mathematical relationships encoded in the pattern, and I'd think, this is what schizophrenia feels like. This is what it's like to lose touch with reality. But then I'd check my observations against the message, against the decoded sections, and they'd match. The patterns I was seeing weren't random. They were real structures, real mathematical relationships that actually existed in the physical world. The message had given me new eyes, and with those eyes, I could see the scaffolding beneath reality. Dr. Klein confirmed it one day, inadvertently. He was working on a particularly complex section of the message, something about observation protocols and consciousness resonance, and he asked me to check his math. I glanced at his screen, and before he'd even explained what he was working on, I saw the error. Not because I calculated it or reasoned through it, but because I could see it, like spotting a typo in a text. The equation had a term in the wrong place, and the symbol structure was broken, asymmetric in a way that violated the deeper patterns. I pointed it out, explained the correction, and Klein just stared at me. "How did you see that so fast?" he asked. "I've been working on this for 6 hours. I didn't have an answer. Or rather, I had an answer I didn't want to say out loud. I saw it because I wasn't thinking in human mathematics anymore. I was thinking in the language of the message, the fundamental structures that the architect used to build reality. The message had infected my cognition so deeply that I was becoming fluent in a language that shouldn't be comprehensible to human minds, and Klein knew it too. I could see it in his expression. He was experiencing the same thing we all were, gradually losing our human way of thinking and gaining something else. Something that let us understand the message more clearly, but cost us our connection to normal human existence. I should have stopped. I knew the pattern by then. The deeper you went into the message, the more it changed you, and the more it changed you, the more likely you were to end up like Reeves or Foster or Wright. It was like playing Russian roulette with your sanity, and every new section you decoded was another pull of the trigger. But I couldn't stop. None of us could. Because we were so close to the end. The quantum computer was at 73% completion, 3/4 of the way through the message, and what we'd found in the recent sections suggested there was more coming, something beyond just the description of our experimental status and the scheduled reset. Section 18 had contained references to alternative outcomes, observation-dependent variables, and most intriguingly, consciousness-initiated protocols. It sounded like, and I barely let myself hope this, it sounded like there might be something we could do, some way to affect the outcome, to change the scheduled termination. Or maybe that was just the addict's rationalization, the junkie's excuse for taking one more hit. Maybe there was nothing in the remaining sections except more horrible truth, more mathematics that would strip away the last remnants of comforting delusion until there was nothing left but raw, unbearable reality. But I kept reading. We all did. Because what else could we do? Stop, go home, try to live normal lives while knowing what we knew, while seeing the symbols everywhere, while feeling the architect's attention pressing down on reality like a physical weight, while watching the calendar tick closer to the reset date, and wondering if today was the day our universe would be compressed back to quantum foam. At least working gave us purpose. At least decoding the message felt like doing something, even if that something was probably hastening our own psychological destruction. So we kept going. 7 people, each of us hanging on by increasingly frayed threads of sanity, racing to decode the rest of the message before we joined the other 5 in death, disappearance, or permanent catatonia. And every day, the symbols got clearer. Every day, the world became more transparent, and I could see the experimental apparatus beneath it more clearly. Every day, I became less Marcus Webb, astrophysicist and human being, and more something else, something that could read the language of creation, but had lost the ability to be part of what was created. I was becoming an observer, like the architect, and the terrible thing, part of me welcomed it. Because if I couldn't be human anymore, at least I could understand. At least I could see the beauty in the mathematics, the elegance in the architecture, even if that architecture was a cage, and that beauty was my prison. That's what the message did to you. It didn't just drive you insane, it made you grateful for the insanity, because sanity meant ignorance, and ignorance had become unbearable. By April, I was working mostly alone. The facility felt like a tomb, vast and empty, with too many shadows and not enough people to fill them. Colonel Martinez had ordered most of the remaining team to take mandatory rest periods after what happened to Owens. Sarah was on enforced leave, confined to quarters with daily psychiatric evaluations. Dr. Hassan had been transferred to a secure medical facility for observation and treatment, which I suspected was a polite way of saying they were keeping him sedated so he wouldn't hurt himself. Dr. Park hadn't spoken in 6 days and spent most of her time drawing symbols on paper with mechanical precision, like a printer. That left me, Dr. Klein, Dr. Sullivan, and Yuki still actively working, and even they were restricted to 4-hour shifts with mandatory supervision. But I'd convinced Martinez to let me keep working through the nights. I told her I was close to a breakthrough, that the remaining sections of the message contained critical information we needed. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the symbols, and they were clearer in darkness than they ever were in light. Working was the only thing that kept me from screaming. The quantum computer had reached 89% completion. We were in the final sections now, section 23 through 27, and the content was different from everything that had come before. Less description, less explanation, more instruction, technical specifications, mathematical protocols. And in section 24, buried in what appeared to be a maintenance log, a status report on the experiment's progress, I found the date. At first, I didn't recognize it as a date. It was expressed in units I'd never seen before, a numerical sequence that meant nothing to my human understanding. But I'd been living and breathing this message for months now, thinking in its patterns, and something about the structure felt familiar. It was counting something, measuring a duration. I spent 4 hours that night, or morning, I'd lost track of which, cross-referencing the number against everything we'd decoded. The message used several different time measurement systems depending on context. Some were based on quantum oscillations, some on stellar processes, some on concepts so abstract I could barely grasp them. But this number, this specific sequence in section 24, matched the format used elsewhere for cosmological timescales. Universal time, measured from the initial expansion of our universe, the Big Bang. The number represented a duration from T0, the moment our universe began, to a specific point in the future. I wrote it down on paper, actual paper, because my hands were shaking too badly to type, and started the conversion process. Universal time to local stellar time, accounting for relativistic effects and the specific reference frame of Earth. Local stellar time to standard astronomical units. Standard astronomical units to Earth, years, months, days. The math was complex, required accounting for the expansion of spacetime itself, but I'd done similar calculations hundreds of times in my career. This should have been routine. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept making stupid errors, having to start over, checking and rechecking because I knew that this number was important, that it was the number, the one that mattered more than anything else in the message. After 6 hours of calculations, 3 pots of terrible coffee, and 2 complete breakdowns where I had to stop and force myself to breathe because my chest felt like it was being crushed, I had my answer. A date in our calendar. The scheduled termination of experiment 72423. The day the architect would compress our universe back to quantum substrate and begin the next iteration. I stared at the number on my paper for a long time, long enough that the sun came up outside. Not that I could see it 5 floors underground, but I felt it somehow, a change in the quality of the silence. The date was close. I'm not going to tell you exactly when. I can't. Not because of classification or fear of causing panic, but because I'm not sure I converted it correctly. My math might be wrong. My understanding of the time dilation factors might be flawed. I could be off by months or even years in either direction. But even accounting for uncertainty, even giving myself the maximum margin of error, the date was measured in years, not decades, not centuries, years, single-digit years, maybe as few as 2, maybe as many as 7. But somewhere in that range, according to the message, the architect would conclude its observation period, compile its data on how this particular set of universal constants had produced complexity and consciousness, and then, and here's the technical term the message used, recycle the substrate. Everything would end. Not in fire, not in ice, not in heat death or cosmic collapse, or any of the dramatic scenarios physicists had theorized. In something worse, in systematic deconstruction. The message described the process in Section 24 with clinical precision. It wasn't destruction, wasn't annihilation in any normal sense. The matter and energy wouldn't cease to exist. Conservation laws applied even at this meta-universal level, apparently. No, what would happen was more like, imagine you've built an elaborate sandcastle on a beach. You've spent hours on it, creating detailed structures, towers and walls and moats. And now you're done observing it, done documenting it. So you smooth the sand back to a flat surface so you can build something new. The sand doesn't disappear. It just stops being a castle. It becomes undifferentiated beach again, ready for the next creation. That's what would happen to our universe. Every particle would be decompiled back to its quantum waveform. All the forces and fields and space-time curvature would be reset to null values. And then the substrate, the fundamental quantum foam that underlies reality, would be randomly reconfigured with new physical constants, new laws, new initial conditions. A new universe would expand from that reconfigured substrate. Maybe it would develop life, maybe consciousness, maybe neither. The architect would watch and document whatever emerged, just as it had watched us. And there would be no record that we had ever existed, no memory, no echo, no trace. The atoms that made up your body, the photons that carried the light you saw, the space-time through which you moved, all of it would be broken down and reassembled into something completely different. You wouldn't die. You'd be unmade, retroactively rendered, never having existed. I think that's when I understood what drove Reeves over the edge. It wasn't the knowledge that we were going to end. Humans have always known we're going to die, that civilizations fall, that even stars burn out eventually. We've made peace with mortality, with impermanence. But this was different. This wasn't death. This was ontological erasure. It meant that everything you'd ever done, every choice you'd made, every person you'd loved, every moment of joy or pain or beauty or suffering, none of it would matter. Not in the tragic but profound way that nothing matters in an indifferent universe, but in the literal sense that it would be unmade, unwritten from the fabric of reality itself. Your existence wouldn't be a tragedy. It would be a data point in a spreadsheet that gets deleted when the experiment concludes. And the absolute worst part, the message made it clear this wasn't the first time. This wasn't even the 100th time. The architect had run countless experiments before ours, thousands, maybe millions of universes, each one cultivated, observed, documented, and recycled. Countless trillions of conscious beings, entire civilizations spanning millions of years, all of it systematically unmade and forgotten. We weren't special. We were just the current iteration. Experiment 72423. And when our scheduled date arrived, we'd join all those previous experiments in absolute oblivion. I sat there in the empty facility at 6:47 a.m. on April 18th, holding a piece of paper with the date of the apocalypse written on it, and I laughed. Actually laughed out loud, the sound echoing off the walls of the observation room, and I couldn't stop, because it was funny, in a horrible cosmic joke kind of way. All of human history, everything we'd achieved, the pyramids, the Sistine Chapel, landing on the moon, Shakespeare and Einstein and every beautiful thing anyone had ever created, All of it was just noise and a dataset, background information and an experiment that was scheduled for completion. We'd spent millennia wondering if there was a God, if there was meaning to existence, if consciousness had some higher purpose. And the answer was yes. Yes, there was a creator. Yes, existence had a purpose. But the purpose was scientific observation, and the creator viewed us the way we viewed bacteria, with clinical interest but zero emotional investment. My laughter turned into something else, something that sounded like sobbing but felt like screaming, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at that date and feel the weight of it crushing me from the inside out. That's when I saw him, or it, the architect. I know how that sounds. I know you're thinking I hallucinated, that the stress and sleep deprivation and months of exposure to information that human minds weren't meant to process had finally broken me completely. Maybe you're right. Maybe it was a hallucination, but it felt real, more real than anything I'd ever experienced. I was sitting at my workstation, still holding that piece of paper with shaking hands, and the air in front of me changed. That's the only way I can describe it. The space itself became wrong, like looking at a 3D object rendered in only 2 dimensions, or like seeing a color that shouldn't exist. And in that wrongness, I perceived awareness, vast, incomprehensible awareness, paying attention to me, not looking at me the way you look at a person, more like, have you ever been suddenly aware that you have a heartbeat, that your lungs are breathing, that your body is doing countless automatic processes you normally don't consciously perceive? It was like that. The architect became aware of me the way you might become aware of a single neuron firing in your brain, not because I was important, but because something about my pattern of consciousness had triggered an observation protocol. I was flagged for attention the way you might notice an unusual sensation in your hand. And in that moment of attention, I understood, really understood, in a way that went beyond words or even thoughts. The architect wasn't malevolent, wasn't benevolent either. Those concepts didn't apply. It was doing exactly what we would do in its position, running experiments to understand how reality works at a fundamental level. We were conscious, yes, but so were the experimental mice we used in medical research, and we euthanized them and dissected them when the experiment concluded, not out of cruelty, but because that was the protocol. The architect was studying consciousness itself, the emergence of complexity from simple rules, the development of information processing systems that became self-aware. And we were one data point among thousands, each universe a separate trial with slightly different parameters. Our suffering mattered as much as the discomfort of bacteria on a slide mattered to the microbiologist studying them, which is to say it was documented, measured, noted as a variable, but it didn't change the experimental protocol. The scheduled termination date was set based on mathematical models of when this particular universe would reach maximum interesting complexity. After that point, the data collection would have diminishing returns. Better to reset, try new parameters, see what emerged from different initial conditions. It was logical, efficient, scientific, and absolutely, utterly unbearable to any conscious being who understood what it meant for themselves. The presence faded, or my perception of it did, and I was alone again in the observation room with my calculations and my knowledge and the crushing certainty that Reeves had been right. We were being watched. Not by some benevolent God who cared about our prayers and choices, but by something so far beyond us that our entire existence was just an experiment in its laboratory. And that experiment was almost over. I looked down at the paper in my hands, at the date I'd calculated, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to tell the others. Not the exact date, anyway. What good would it do? Give them a countdown to oblivion? Let them watch the calendar and know exactly when everything would end? Better to let them work. Let them think there might be more time than there was. Let them hold on to whatever hope remained. But I folded the paper carefully, put it in my pocket, and walked to the elevator. I was going to break protocol. I was going to leave the facility without authorization, go home, take a shower, sleep in my own bed. If security stopped me, fine. If Martinez court-martialed me, fine. Because I knew now, with absolute certainty, that nothing I did mattered. The date was set, the reset was scheduled, and somewhere in the next few years, the architect would close its experiment, smooth our universe back to quantum substrate, and start fresh with new parameters. Everything I'd ever done, everything I'd ever been, would be unmade, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop it. I made it 3 days. 3 days of trying to live a normal life, of sleeping in my own bed, and cooking my own meals and pretending I was still human. But the symbols were everywhere, worse than ever, and the silence of my empty apartment was deafening because I could hear the universe breathing beneath it, the quantum oscillations that the message had taught me to perceive. On the third night, I gave up. I drove back to JPL at 2 a.m., showed my credentials to the night security, and descended back into the facility like a moth returning to a flame that was already burning it alive. Dr. Klein was there, working alone in the observation room. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "Couldn't stay away either?" he asked, not looking up from his screen. I just nodded and sat down at my workstation. The quantum computer had reached 94% completion. Section 26 was fully decoded, and 27 was in progress. We were so close to the end now, so close to understanding the complete message. And that's when I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. Something so fundamental I felt stupid for missing it. "Klein," I said, my voice hoarse from not speaking for 3 days. "Why did they send this message?" He looked at me, confused. "What do you mean? To document the experiment too?" "No," I interrupted. "Why send it to us? Why put it in a probe and launch it through interstellar space? The architect is observing everything anyway, right? It knows what's happening in this universe because it's aware of all consciousness within its experiment. So why bother sending a physical message?" Klein opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. I could see him thinking through the implications, and I watched his expression change from confusion to understanding to horror. "Unless," he said slowly, "the message isn't for the architect. It's for us, but not to inform us. He trailed off, staring at his screen where Section 26 was displayed, and I saw him start reading it with new eyes. Oh God. Oh Jesus Christ. I was already pulling up the section on my own screen, scanning through the translations we'd completed, and there it was, hidden in plain sight, woven through the technical descriptions and observation protocols. The true purpose of 3i Atlas. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't even really a message in the traditional sense. It was a marker, a warning beacon, a notification. The message contained a complete explanation in Section 26, buried in what we'd thought was just more documentation of experimental protocols. But reading it now, with the understanding of what the reset date meant, the true purpose became horrifyingly clear. 3i Atlas was an automated system, launched by the architect, or more accurately, by automated processes acting on the architect's behalf, toward any substrate reality that had developed spacefaring consciousness. The probe itself wasn't important. It was just a delivery mechanism, a way to get the message into the experimental space without direct interference. And the message? It was a notification, a courtesy warning, the kind you'd post on a laboratory before fumigating it. Warning: this facility will be sterilized on date. All biological samples will be destroyed. Vacate immediately. Except we couldn't vacate. We were part of the experiment, part of the substrate reality being shut down. The message wasn't to help us escape or survive. It was protocol, standard procedure for ethical experimentation. You inform test subjects when possible. You document that you provided notice. You check a box that says, subjects were notified of experimental termination, so your research review board doesn't flag your methodology as unnecessarily cruel. It's courtesy, Klein said, his voice hollow. They're being polite, like when you euthanize lab rats for dissection. You're supposed to do it humanely, minimize suffering. And part of that, for conscious beings, is giving them knowledge of what's coming, so they can prepare, accept it, make peace with it. He laughed, a broken sound. They think they're being kind. I felt sick, actually physically nauseated, my stomach churning like I was going to vomit, because he was right. The message wasn't malicious, it was considerate, in the same way that a researcher might play soothing music for mice before euthanizing them. The architect, or whatever automated systems managed these experiments, had determined that conscious beings deserved to know their fate, deserved to understand the nature of their existence before it ended. It was enlightenment, as a courtesy before execution, and we'd spent months desperately decoding it, thinking we were discovering profound truths, thinking we were advancing human knowledge. We were just reading our own death notice, the universe's eviction letter, delivered 3.7 light years in advance, so we'd have time to read it before the demolition date. But there was more. Section 27, still being decoded in real time by the quantum processor, contained something different, something that made all the previous sections make terrible sense. I watched the translation appear on my screen, line by line, and felt my understanding of reality crack a little further. The message contained coordinates, not spatial coordinates. We'd established that 3i Atlas had come from the direction of Cygnus, but that wasn't the point. These were different. They were cognitive coordinates, consciousness coordinates, mathematical descriptions of specific patterns of neural activity, specific configurations of information processing that corresponded to understanding the message. It was like the message contained a map, but instead of showing locations in space, it showed locations in the possibility space of consciousness, states of mind, patterns of thought, and one set of coordinates, appearing over and over throughout the final section, corresponded exactly to the brain activity of someone who had read and understood the complete message. Someone like me, someone like Reeves, someone like everyone else on the team who'd gone deep enough into the translations to really comprehend what they meant. "It's marking us," I said aloud, and Klein looked at me. "The message. Everyone who reads it, everyone who really understands it gets marked. These coordinates aren't describing where we are. They're describing what we are, what we've become by understanding the message." Klein was reading the same section, his face pale. "It's an observation tag, like how biologists tag animals in the wild to track them. The message embeds itself in our consciousness, changes our neural patterns to match these coordinates, and that change makes us visible, more visible, to the architect." And suddenly, I understood why Reeves had written, "He is watching us" on his mirror. Why Foster had looked up at the sky before stepping in front of the train. Why Wright had written about feeling the attention withdrawing. The message didn't just inform us about the experiment. It made us active participants in the observation protocol. By understanding the nature of our reality, by becoming conscious of the architect and its purposes, we'd changed our consciousness patterns to match the observation coordinates. We'd effectively raised our hands and said, "I know you're watching," and the architect had noticed. That's what had killed Reeves. Not the knowledge itself, though that was bad enough, but the attention. Once you understood the message completely, once your consciousness matched those coordinates, you became a point of interest in the experiment, a specimen exhibiting anomalous awareness. And the architect's attention, focused on a single human consciousness, was like trying to look at the sun without going blind. Our minds weren't built to be perceived that directly by something that vast. Reeves had felt it first, because he'd understood the message most completely. He'd transformed his consciousness to exactly match the observation coordinates, and the architect's automated monitoring systems had flagged him, brought him into focus, observed him with the full weight of its incomprehensible awareness, and it had burned through his mind like a laser through tissue paper. The heart attack was just his body's response to his consciousness being vivisected by something that viewed his entire existence as a single data point worth examining. The rest of us were heading toward the same fate. Every day we spent reading the message. Every new section we decoded, we were matching more and more of those coordinates, becoming more visible, drawing more attention. Reeves had reached 100% understanding. Foster had probably been close. Wright, too. That's why they'd broken. Why they'd chosen death or disappearance over continuing to exist under that level of scrutiny. "We need to stop," Klein said, but he wasn't moving away from his screen. Neither was I. Because the addiction wasn't just psychological. The message had explained that too in Section 25, in passages we'd read but hadn't fully grasped. The information was self-propagating. Once you started understanding it, once you'd changed your consciousness patterns even slightly toward the observation coordinates, you needed to continue. It was like the message created a resonance in your mind, and that resonance demanded completion, a song that you couldn't stop humming once you'd heard it. Except the song was rewriting your fundamental nature, and the only way to satisfy the need was to keep reading until you matched the coordinates perfectly, until you were marked completely, until the architect could see you with perfect clarity. And then what? I pulled up Section 27 again, reading the portions that had finished decoding. There was something else there, something about observation conclusion protocols and consciousness preservation options, and terms I couldn't quite translate. It almost sounded like, but that couldn't be right, could it? It almost sounded like being marked wasn't just about observation. There was something else, some other purpose to matching those coordinates. Some reason why the architect wanted certain consciousnesses to become perfectly visible right before the reset. Klein, I said slowly, trying to work through the implications even as the translations appeared. What if the marking isn't just for observation? What if it's selection? He looked at me, and I saw my own terrible hope reflected in his eyes. Section 27. It mentions preservation protocols and consciousness extraction and cross-substrate continuity. What if the architect doesn't just destroy everything when it resets the experiment? What if it saves some of it? The most interesting data? The consciousnesses that became aware enough to understand the message. You're talking about harvesting, Klein said, his voice shaking. Like taking tissue samples before destroying the culture, preserving the interesting specimens. I nodded, feeling sick and hopeful and terrified all at once. The message marks us, makes us visible, makes us interesting. Everyone who understands it completely gets flagged for, what? Preservation? Transfer to some other substrate? Continuation in some form we can't comprehend? It was a thin hope, a desperate rationalization, but it was something. Maybe Reeves hadn't just died. Maybe his consciousness had been extracted, saved, continued in some form beyond our universe. Maybe that's what he'd seen when he looked at the ceiling. Not death approaching, but transformation. Ascension to some higher state of existence as data in the architect's systems. Or maybe that was just the final trap, the last cruelty of the message. Make us think that understanding it would save us, would grant us some kind of immortality, when really it just made our deaths more noticeable, more worth documenting. I didn't know. The quantum computer was at 97% completion now, and the final sections of Section 27 were still decoding. Whatever the truth was, it would be revealed soon, and I would read it, because I couldn't stop. None of us could. We were marked now, tagged for observation. Our consciousnesses already halfway transformed into something that matched the architect's coordinates. The only way out was through, and whether that meant death or transcendence or something worse than either, I was going to find out. Because I'd read this far, because I couldn't unknow what I knew, because the symbols were everywhere now, so thick I could barely see normal reality through them, because I was more pattern than person now, more information than human, and because somewhere in the last 3% of the message, in the final sections that were still hidden, was the answer to the question that mattered most. What happens to the ones who are marked when the reset comes? I was going to find out, even if the answer destroyed me, especially if it did, because at least that would be an ending. And after months of this, anything that ended the knowing would be mercy. It started 3 days after I decoded Section 27, the feeling of being watched. I know how cliché that sounds, how perfectly it fits the narrative of someone losing their grip on reality. But this wasn't paranoia. This wasn't the vague unease you get walking alone at night, or the sense that someone's looking at you in a crowded room. This was specific, constant, oppressive, like standing in front of a spotlight that you couldn't see but could feel on your skin, hot and invasive and wrong. It followed me everywhere, in the facility, in my apartment, in my car, even in the shower. With my eyes closed and water running over my face, I could feel it. Attention. Vast, incomprehensible attention, focused on me with the weight of a physical presence. And the worst part? I knew exactly what it was. The architect's observation protocols, triggered by my consciousness matching those coordinates in the message. I'd become interesting, a specimen worth monitoring in detail. And now that I was being observed, I couldn't stop feeling it every moment of every day. The electronics started malfunctioning around day 5. My phone would randomly restart, lose signal in areas with perfect coverage, display text messages I never sent to numbers I didn't recognize. My laptop began writing corrupted files, saving documents I never created with names like observation log 7242 3 specimen 4478.ext that contained nothing but strings of symbols when I opened them. The lights in my apartment flickered constantly, and my TV turned itself on at 3:33 a.m. every single night, displaying nothing but static that formed patterns if I stared at it too long. The quantum computer at the facility crashed 4 times in 2 days, always when I was working on it, always displaying the same error message: consciousness resonance overflow. Dr. Hassan, back from medical leave and heavily medicated, said it was probably electromagnetic interference from my phone or some equipment malfunction, but I knew better. The architect observed through consciousness, yes, but observation at the quantum level affects physical systems. By watching me this intently, It was creating ripples in the electromagnetic fields around me. My presence was becoming destabilizing to electronic devices because I was being perceived too intensely by something operating outside normal space-time. Then came the blackouts. The first one happened on April 29th. I remember sitting at my workstation at 11:47 p.m., reading through section 28. The quantum computer had reached 99% completion. Almost done now. Almost finished with the message. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, I was in my apartment, sitting on my couch, and sunlight was streaming through the windows. My phone said it was April 30th, 2:13 p.m. I'd lost 14 hours. Complete blank. No memory, no sense of time passing. Just a hard cut from late night to mid-afternoon, like someone had edited a film and removed all the frames in between. I checked my body for injuries, looked around my apartment for clues about what I'd done during those missing hours. Everything seemed normal. My car was in its parking space. My clothes were the same ones I'd been wearing. But on my kitchen table, written in my handwriting on a piece of notebook paper, were 3 sentences. You read the message. You understood it completely. You are now specimen data. I didn't remember writing it. The handwriting was mine. I recognized my own distinctive way of forming the letter G, but I had absolutely no memory of sitting down at that table with a pen. The second blackout was longer. May 3rd to May 5th, 48 hours completely gone. I woke up, standing in the parking lot of JPL at 6:23 a.m., holding my security badge in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. The coffee was still hot. I must have bought it recently, but I couldn't remember where or when. Security footage later showed me entering and leaving the facility multiple times during those 2 days, always alone, always moving purposefully like I knew exactly where I was going, but I don't remember any of it. The recordings showed me working at my station, eating in the cafeteria, even having a brief conversation with Dr. Klein, where I apparently told him the quantum computer would finish decoding within 72 hours. I watched myself on that footage and didn't recognize the person I saw. The way I moved was wrong, too precise, too mechanical. And my eyes. There was something wrong with my eyes, even on the grainy security video. They didn't blink often enough, didn't track movement the way human eyes should. I looked like me, sounded like me, but I wasn't present. Something else had been operating my body while my consciousness was somewhere else, being observed, being documented, being analyzed by something that wanted to understand what it felt like to be a human who knew he was trapped in an experiment. I started finding notes everywhere, in my pockets, in my car, taped to my bathroom mirror, tucked into books I hadn't opened in months, all in my handwriting, all saying things I didn't remember thinking. The observation is mutual now. Consciousness cannot be contained by substrate boundaries. You wanted to understand. Now you are understood. Specimen 4478 exhibits awareness of observation protocols. That last one particularly disturbed me because I'd never seen that designation, Specimen 4478, anywhere in the decoded message, which meant either I'd found it in sections I didn't remember reading during my blackouts, or something was communicating with me using my own hand, giving me information that wasn't in the message at all. Direct communication from the architect bypassed through my unconscious mind during periods when I wasn't consciously present. I was becoming a bridge, a conduit for observation flowing both ways. It was observing me, and through me, experiencing what it was like to be observed. A feedback loop of awareness that was destroying my sense of self. The shadows started moving on May 7th, not in the paranoid I saw something in my peripheral vision way, but objectively, observably moving. I'd be sitting in my apartment and watch my own shadow on the wall bend at angles that didn't correspond to any light source. I'd see shadows of furniture that stretched toward me regardless of where the lamps were positioned. And sometimes, in the spaces between objects, in the corners where shadow met shadow, I'd see shapes that weren't shadows of anything physical, geometric forms, impossible architectures, the visual manifestation of mathematical structures that existed in dimensions we couldn't normally perceive. The symbols from the message, but rendered in darkness, appearing in three-dimensional space as if reality itself was being annotated with observations. I started keeping my lights on constantly, but it didn't help. The shadows existed independent of light now. They were marks of observation, indicators of where the architect's attention was pressing against our reality, creating visible distortions. Dr. Klein saw them too. He admitted it during what would be our last conversation. May 9th, in the facility cafeteria at 4 a.m., both of us surviving on coffee and denial. I see writing in the empty spaces, he said quietly, not looking at me. Between objects, in the air, equations that solve themselves in real time, describing the quantum state of everything around me. And Marcus, he finally looked up, and his eyes were wrong, the same wrongness I'd seen in my own security footage. I can read them now. I understand what they say. The architect isn't just observing us, it's annotating reality, adding notes to the experiment like a researcher writing in the margins of a lab report.
And we can see the notes because we've become part of the observation apparatus. We're not just specimens anymore. We're instruments, tools for measuring consciousness from inside the system being measured. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Heisenberg was right. The observer affects the observed, but he never considered what happens when the observed becomes the observer, when you're simultaneously the scientist and the experiment.
I went home that night, or morning technically, and sat in my apartment trying to decide if I was insane or if insanity was actually the correct response to objective reality. The quantum computer had reached 100% completion on May 8th. The entire message was decoded. All 28 sections, every equation, every protocol, every terrible truth about the nature of our existence. And the final section, section 28, had confirmed my fears and hopes in equal measure. The marked consciousnesses, the ones who understood the message completely, who matched the observation coordinates, would not be destroyed when the reset came. They would be extracted, preserved. Their consciousness patterns would be copied, archived, transferred to the architect's storage systems to be studied in detail after the experiment concluded. We wouldn't survive, not really. But patterns that resembled us, information structures that contained our memories and thoughts, and the essence of what we'd been, would continue existing as data, living museums. Consciousness exhibits in some vast collection of interesting specimens from failed experiments. It was immortality in the worst possible way. We'd become permanent objects of study, our awareness preserved in amber, eternally conscious of being observed but unable to act, to grow, to change, to die. Forever frozen in the moment of understanding, forever experiencing the weight of the architect's attention. Reeves had understood this. That's why he'd chosen death. Better to die as a human than be preserved as a curiosity. I made my decision on May 10th. I was going to document everything, record this entire experience from the beginning to now, from the first detection of 3I Atlas to the understanding of what it really meant, to the transformation I'd undergone by reading the message. Maybe nobody would believe it. Probably nobody would. But it needed to be said. Needed to be recorded before I either died, disappeared, or became something too transformed to communicate with normal humans. I bought a laptop with cash from a pawn shop, couldn't trust my own electronics anymore, and started writing. This document, these words you're reading now. And as I wrote, I realized I was writing during another blackout. I'd sat down at 11 p.m. on May 10th, and when I looked at the clock next, it was 6:47 a.m. on May 11th. But the document showed I'd been writing continuously. Thousands of words, describing everything that had happened with detail I didn't consciously remember. My fingers had been moving on their own, recording observations fed to me by, what? My subconscious. The architect using me as a transcription device? I honestly didn't know. Still don't. But the document was accurate. Everything I'd written matched what I consciously remembered, plus additional details that felt true even though I didn't remember experiencing them firsthand. I'm going to finish this. Going to tell you everything, right up to the end. But I need you to understand something crucial. If you've read this far, if you've absorbed this information, you're being affected too. Maybe not as intensely as me. You haven't decoded the complete message, haven't matched all the observation coordinates. But you know now. You understand enough to have changed your consciousness patterns slightly. You're being watched too, at least peripherally. You might start seeing the symbols soon, might notice shadows moving wrong, might lose time and find notes you don't remember writing. And if you do, you have a choice to make. You can stop, close this document, delete it, forget everything you've read, and pray that your consciousness patterns haven't changed enough to be interesting. Or you can keep going. Read the final section. Learn what happened in those last days before I recorded this. Understand completely, and join me in being marked, being observed, being selected for preservation when the reset comes. I don't know which choice is right. I don't even know if there is a right choice anymore, but you need to make it consciously, need to decide with full knowledge what you're willing to risk to know the truth, because once you're marked, there's no going back. You'll see the symbols until the day the universe ends. You'll feel the attention until your consciousness is extracted or destroyed. You'll know with absolute certainty that you're nothing but data in an experiment, and that knowledge will hollow you out from the inside until there's nothing left but the observation itself. So decide now. Stop or continue. Ignorance or marking. The comfortable lie or the unbearable truth. I'll wait. So here we are, back to now. Back to this motel room in Barstow where I've been recording everything, trying to get it all down before it's too late. If you've made it this far, if you've read every word of this account, then I need to tell you something important. Something I should have told you at the beginning, but you wouldn't have believed me then. You might not even believe me now. But here it is. Project Lighthouse was officially terminated on May 15th, 2025. Colonel Martinez assembled what was left of the team. Me, Dr. Klein, Dr. Chen, and Dr. Tanaka, the only four who could still function well enough to attend a meeting, and informed us that the program was being shut down effective immediately. The quantum computer was to be dismantled. All research data classified under a new designation above top secret. All physical evidence destroyed. All personnel reassigned or placed on indefinite medical leave with NDAs that made our previous agreements look like permission slips. The official reason given was failure to produce actionable intelligence. The real reason was that they were terrified. We decoded the message. We knew what it said. And they couldn't do anything with that information except watch us slowly lose our minds. They separated us after that, sent us to different locations, different facilities, probably hoping that isolation would prevent us from comparing notes or going public. Dr. Klein was transferred to a psychiatric hospital in Colorado. Dr. Chen was placed in a medical research facility in Virginia for extended observation. Dr. Tanaka, I don't know what happened to him. He disappeared 2 days after the shutdown, and nobody will tell me where he is or even if he's still alive. That leaves me. And Dr. Jennifer Park, who I forgot to mention is still catatonic in a military hospital somewhere, and Dr. Marcus Sullivan, who supposedly checked himself into a private psychiatric clinic in New Mexico, but hasn't responded to any attempts at contact. So out of 12 original team members, Dr. Reeves, dead. Dr. Foster, dead. Dr. Wright, vanished. Lieutenant Commander Owens, permanent coma. Dr. Hassan, institutionalized and heavily medicated. Dr. Park, catatonic. Dr. Sullivan, possibly dead or disappeared. Dr. Klein, locked in a psych ward. Dr. Chen, under medical containment. Dr. Tanaka, disappeared. That's 10. Which means only 2 of us are still out here, still capable of communicating. Me, and whoever Dr. Sullivan really is if he's even still alive. 2 survivors out of 12. Pretty good success rate for an experiment in forbidden knowledge. I've been in this motel for 6 days now. Paid cash for 2 weeks up front, using money I withdrew in small amounts over the past month. No credit cards, no digital trail. I left my phone in a dumpster in Pasadena. The laptop I'm using right now was purchased from a pawn shop with serial numbers filed off. I'm not on any grid. Not officially anyway. But they'll find me eventually. They always do. The question is whether I can finish this and get it uploaded before they arrive. Before they drag me to whatever facility they're keeping the others in, pump me full of antipsychotics until I can't tell reality from hallucination, and bury this entire story so deep that nobody will ever hear about it. That's what they do with inconvenient truths. Not destroy them. You can't destroy information, the architect taught me that, but contain them, classify them, make sure that anyone who tries to talk about them sounds so crazy that nobody listens, which is probably what's going to happen to this document. You'll read it, if it survives, and think it's fiction, creative writing, an elaborate creepypasta, and maybe that's for the best. Maybe you should think that. But here's what you need to know, what I need to tell you before this ends. The symbols are everywhere now, not just for me. I think they're becoming visible to more people. I've been monitoring online forums, conspiracy theory sites, places where people report strange phenomena. And over the past month, there's been an uptick in reports. People seeing geometric patterns in clouds, in static, in the spaces between things. People losing time, finding notes they don't remember writing, experiencing the sensation of being watched by something vast and incomprehensible. Most of them don't know what it means. They think they're going crazy, or that it's some kind of mass hallucination, or 5G towers, or government mind control. They don't understand that they're seeing the observation apparatus, that the architect's attention is spreading, encompassing more consciousnesses as the reset date approaches. It's like the experiment is reaching critical mass, the final phase before data collection completes and the system gets shut down. And the ones who are becoming aware of it, who are starting to see the symbols and feel the attention, they're being marked too. Maybe not as intensely as those of us who read the complete message, but marked nonetheless, selected for preservation, or documentation, or whatever the architect does with consciousnesses that become aware of their true nature before the end. The last 72 hours have been the worst. The symbols don't fade anymore. They're constant, overlaying everything I see like augmented reality that I can't turn off. I look at the wall of this motel room and see equations describing the molecular structure of the paint, the quantum states of the atoms, the probability fields of possible futures branching out from this moment. I look at my hands and see them as information patterns, consciousness temporarily configured in flesh, already starting to resemble the pure data structure I'll become when I'm extracted.
I close my eyes and the symbols are brighter, more insistent, pressing against the inside of my skull like they're trying to write themselves directly onto my brain. And underneath it all, constantly, is the sensation of being observed, being studied, being documented in excruciating detail by something that knows me more completely than I know myself. It should be unbearable, and it is. But I've also gotten used to it, which is maybe worse. I've accepted that this is what existence is now. This is what I am now, not Marcus Webb, human being, but Specimen 4478. Interesting data point in a failing experiment. They know I'm recording this. The architect knows. I can feel its attention focusing every time I type a sentence, analyzing my word choices, documenting how a marked consciousness attempts to communicate its experience to unmarked consciousnesses. This document isn't just my testimony, it's data. Evidence of how awareness of the experiment affects behavior within the experiment. Even this moment right now, me telling you that I'm being observed while I write this, is part of the observation. It's recursive, all-encompassing. There's no way to step outside of it because everything I do, everything I think, is happening inside the system being studied. But I don't care anymore. Let it document me. Let it analyze every word. I'm going to tell the truth anyway, not because I think it will change anything, but because I need to. Because maybe somewhere out there is someone who will read this and understand. Someone who will see the symbols and know they're not alone. Someone who will feel the attention and recognize it for what it is. And maybe, just maybe, that person will be better prepared than I was when the reset comes. Here's what I think, and this is just speculation. Understanding filtered through a human mind that's been fundamentally altered by forbidden knowledge. I think being marked might mean something, might be important. The message said marked consciousnesses would be preserved, but it didn't say why.
What's the purpose of preserving us? Just as specimens, as curiosities in some cosmic museum? Or is there another reason? What if, and I know this sounds like desperate hope, like the rationalization of someone who can't face the meaninglessness of it all? What if the architect preserves marked consciousnesses because they're useful? Because consciousness that understands the nature of the experiment can be used in future experiments, as observers, as tools, as something I can't even conceptualize because the purpose exists outside the framework of human understanding. Maybe we're not victims. Maybe we're being recruited, transformed, prepared for something beyond this substrate reality. Or maybe I'm just insane, and this is how my mind is coping with the certainty of obliteration. By inventing meaning where none exists. By imagining purpose in what is simply data collection before disposal. I honestly don't know anymore. The line between insight and delusion has become so blurred I can't tell which side I'm on. But I'll tell you this, if you've read this far, if you've absorbed this information, you're probably marked now too. Maybe just a little, maybe just enough to start seeing things you shouldn't be able to see. And if that happens, if you start noticing geometric patterns and random noise, if shadows start moving wrong, if you lose time and find notes you don't remember writing, if you feel something vast and incomprehensible paying attention to you, don't panic. Or do panic. I don't know if it makes a difference. But understand that you're not crazy. You're just perceiving a level of reality that most humans can't. You're seeing the experiment from inside the petri dish, seeing the glass walls and the researcher beyond them. And yes, it's terrifying. Yes, it will change you in ways you can't reverse. Yes, you'll probably end up like me, isolated, paranoid, halfway between human and something else, counting down the days until the universe ends. But you'll also understand. You'll know the truth. And maybe, when the reset comes, when everything gets compressed back to quantum substrate and rebuilt with new parameters, maybe the marked ones, the ones who understood, who saw the symbols, who felt the attention, maybe we'll be the only ones who experience it consciously. Maybe we'll be aware during the transition. Maybe that awareness means something, or maybe it means nothing. And I'm just another data point that got interesting briefly before being archived and forgotten. There's no way to know until it happens. The reset date is coming. I converted the numbers, checked them 100 times, and unless my math is completely wrong, and it might be, my ability to think clearly isn't what it used to be, we have somewhere between 18 months and 4 years. That's the window. Sometime in that range, the architect will initiate the reset sequence, and everything that exists will be systematically deconstructed. Your memories, your consciousness, your physical body, the Earth, the solar system, every galaxy and star and particle in this universe will be broken down to quantum information and recycled into something new. And either you'll experience that as simple cessation, one moment existing, the next moment not, or if you're marked, you'll experience it as transformation, as your consciousness being copied, extracted, preserved in whatever medium the architect uses to store interesting specimens. I don't know which is better. I used to think preservation was preferable to destruction. Now I'm not so sure. Eternal existence as a studied object, forever under observation, forever aware of being observed, that might be worse than simple ending. Wait, hold on. I heard something outside. Car doors closing. Multiple vehicles. Shit. They found me. I don't know how. Maybe the laptop. Maybe facial recognition from a security camera. Maybe they've been watching me the whole time and just waited to see what I do. It doesn't matter. They're here. I can hear footsteps outside the door. Hear someone on a radio saying, "We have visual confirmation. Subject is inside. Prepare for extraction." I have maybe 30 seconds before they breach the door. Before they drag me out of here and this document becomes evidence in a classified file that nobody will ever see. So listen. If you're reading this, it means I managed to upload it before they got to me. It means this information survived, and that means you have a choice. You can dismiss this as fiction, as the ramblings of someone who went insane. You can go back to your normal life and pretend the universe isn't an experiment scheduled for termination. Or you can look for the symbols, can train yourself to see them, can let yourself become marked, and join those of us who understand what's really happening. I'm not saying you should. I'm not even saying I wish I had. But you should make the choice consciously. Should decide with full knowledge what... Oh God, they're at the door. I can hear them setting up the battering ram. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. Okay. Remember what I said at the beginning. Screenshot this. Save it. Send it to yourself. Because they're going to try to scrub it. They're going to find every copy and delete it and pretend it never existed. But if enough people save it, if enough people share it, maybe some version will survive. Maybe someone will read it after I'm gone and understand that they're not alone, that the symbols are real, that the observation is real, that the experiment is ending, and some of us know it, and there's nothing we can do except watch and wait, and hope that being marked means something more than just being interesting data. The door is shaking. They're about to... Shit. They're coming in. Multiple footsteps, shouting. I can see flashlights through the crack under the door. I need to hit upload now. If you're seeing this, it means I made it. It means someone, somewhere, read this and saved it before they could erase it completely. And if you start seeing the symbols, if you notice patterns that shouldn't exist, if you lose time, if you feel watched, remember, you're not crazy. You're just marked. You're just one of the ones who knows. And maybe, when the reset comes, that will mean something. Maybe we're the only ones who'll understand what's happening when everything ends. Maybe that's important.